There we go.
Welcome. Thank you everyone for being here tonight, and Happy New Year. I'd like to call the Thursday, January 11th, 2018 Envision Yountville Town Advisory Group meeting to order. First item is roll call.
Great. Alternate Member Pena.
Here.
Alternate Member Hudson.
Here.
Member Wickers.
Here.
Member Santos.
Here.
Member Johnson.
Here.
Member Hauer.
Here.
Member Diver McAvoy.
Here.
Member Breidigam.
Here.
Vice Chair Dennington.
Here.
Chair Knight.
Here.
Let the record show that Member Chalmers is excused, and alternate Member Hudson will be a voting member this evening.
Okay, good. That's great. Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So item 4 is the adoption of the agenda, and in a brief conversation with staff today, what I would like to do is to move the land use policy and program discussion first, and then we will follow it with the proposed vision statement. So item 17-1507 will follow item 17-1506, and then we'll do the vision statement as the last item this evening. Is there any comment or concern about that change? Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Item 5 is the public comment on items not on the agenda. So this is an opportunity for the public now to speak to items that we will not be discussing tonight. Is there anyone that would like to make a public comment? Seeing none, I'll close this public comment period. Just for the record, as we move through the land use policy discussions, we have them broken up into objectives. And so at some point, staff will make a presentation on a program objective. The TAG committee will discuss it. We may or may not vote if there's not a consensus on the question. And then I will, before we move to the next item, open up the public comment for that particular item. So if you have a statement on the issue, then you'll be able to make a statement before we move on to the next objective or policy. So thank you very much. So the first item on our agenda tonight is approval of the November 9th, 2017 meeting minutes. Are there any comments or corrections to that agenda item? Got a front and back page on the report. It's mostly the action items were setting up the subcommittee, so there wasn't any discussion on items that we voted on in that meeting. So, hearing no comment, is there a motion to adopt the November 9th, 2017 minutes? There's a motion and a second.
Second.
We have seconds. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So those meeting minutes are accepted. The next item would be the approval of the December 14th, 2017 meeting minutes. In that item, there is discussion on a number of items, including we took some votes on land use changes or comments about some potential design changes in the Vista condominium area and the Toyon Terrace area. Are there any questions or comments about the minutes from the committee? Seeing none, is there a motion to adopt the minutes?
So moved.
We have a motion from Susan to adopt. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Carl. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Those minutes are adopted and approved. So we'll move on now to 17-1507, which is a discussion of the land use policies. And there is information that we'll be discussing tonight on a table in the back of the meeting room if you haven't received a copy yet. But right now we'll let staff has a report.
Yes, good evening, Chair Knight and members of the TAG. So last month we began our discussion of the land use policies and programs, and as you'll recall, the way we wanted the staff proposed doing the review was to first start off by reviewing a number of policies and programs that we kind of pulled out of the matrix, kind of the bigger issues that we wanted to discuss first. We got through, I believe it was 7 of them at the last meeting. So we want to finish up those policies and programs that we had pulled. So we have about 10 of them to go through right now. And then when we're done with those 10, we'd like to kind of go back and go through the matrix from the beginning, and just see if there are anything else that the TAG members or members of the public would like to discuss. Hopefully, at that point, we've gotten kind of through all the really big ones, and there hopefully won't be too much more left to tackle at that point. So with that, let's kind of pick up where we left off last month. And the first one that we want to discuss is the North Washington zoning. So this was one of the things that had been, the TAG actually discussed this when we had our consultants come in. I believe that was in November when they were here, and we had talked about this at that time. And then we also brought this forward the last workshop in order to get input from the community on this. And the idea here is that there are 6 remaining parcels on Washington Street that are zoned residential. So we wanted to explore what we could do with those parcels and essentially converting them to different kinds of commercial uses. So we proposed this question at the workshop to find out what the community felt. And so the question was, under which circumstances, if any, would you support rezoning the last 6 parcels on North Washington Street to commercial? And this is North Washington Street. Just to be clear, it's between Creek and Padroni. And so the most support we had was for small office or service use in the existing structure. And then the second highest was small office and service retail where homeowner resides. So this could be like an office or retail on the first floor, and then the homeowner could be perhaps living on the second floor or in the back of the structure. There was also support for boutique retail, but not food or wine. And then we kind of go down to boutique, small lodging. Complete redevelopment was the least amount, and then we did have some who said no, retain it as housing. So the Residential and Agricultural Subcommittee explored this. We had proposed this new program in response to what we heard back at the workshop. The Commercial Subcommittee was also in support of this program, but they were kind of undecided whether to limit the use to the existing structures only or to allow redevelopment of the entire structure, as long as that was in keeping with the town character. So that's something for the TAG to discuss. The new program says to rezone the remaining 6 residential parcels on the east side of North Washington from residential to commercial to allow lodging, office, service, or non-wine retail uses and second floor residential within the existing structures. So that's what we would like to have everybody talk about and get your input on that one tonight.
Do the subcommittee members that discuss this have any initial comments?
I was part of the Residential Agricultural Subcommittee, and as far as I'm concerned, if you do some redevelopment on one of these properties and it meets all the other requirements of redevelopment, then I don't have a problem with that going to a commercial development. You don't have to stick within the existing walls and whatnot of what you've got there. Just like if you rebuilt completely, you could do something else. So I think this is fine as written.
Eric. I like the program as written, except for the very last part. I don't think we should limit this to existing structures only. I think that there are possibilities for these parcels to be redeveloped to remain within the existing character of the town. I also think that will allow the potential businesses to be a little bit more creative or actually make better use of those parcels, which would benefit the residents in town as well as the businesses.
Eric. I'm not part of that committee, but I'm curious to know, was parking discussed as part of this?
No.
Because it just
No,
appears.
we didn't talk about parking.
Because it appears on the surface, if this mix was allowed in some form or other to go forward, parking would seem to be an issue in that part of town. So.
Sandra, would they have to meet parking requirements?
Yes, they'd be required to meet the town's parking standards. Redevelopment of the parcels may present a challenge in doing so because they would want to max out their FAR and in terms of setbacks and uses. And those are not answers that we have to come to tonight, but it is recognized that they are more constrained because of the small size for a commercial use.
The commercial committee also discussed this.
Is there a button there for you?
How about
There you
now?
go.
There we go. And we had a lot of discussion about whether it would be within the existing structure or not. And I think for us, we felt comfortable with the fact of rezoning the 6 residential parcels to commercial or light commercial. I don't know what the difference there is. But the discussion really is, would it be within the existing structures or not? And I'm leaning now more towards within the existing structures. I think that, as I kind of looked at the path and looked at the way that the buildings were, it would be easier for a new tenant if they could demolish. But I would be concerned that we would have to be so very, very careful about the look and feel of the new structure so that it was not disruptive. And I'm just not sure that we could ensure that. If
I
you
don't
think
think
about
in the general plan you can insure it, but I'm pretty sure the ZDRB could find a way to insure it.
Yeah, they can't really assure it. The only way to assure that it doesn't change is to say that they would have to use the existing structure. It's going to be up to the current ZDRB and then the council. ZDRB does not make the decision. The council would make the decision on how they would see it.
Could staff weigh in on that?
Just one moment. We had another comment. Did you have a comment?
Oh, so I just wanted to clarify the, let's see, the committee was myself, Liz, and Whitney, the
Commercial
development. And I would just echo what Whitney said. I think that by allowing to redevelop the site, it just adds more potential for diversity of a different business to go in there. It really just opens it up rather than limiting who can go in. And to answer your question, Davio, we did briefly talk about parking only in the sense of we discussed different types of tenants who might be able to go in there into a space. Some of them are very small. And so it was very briefly discussed, mostly in the sense of if you had some sort of professional office that had lots of people coming and going, that you couldn't facilitate that if you had to have 3 or 4 vehicles parked at the same time.
Okay. Joel, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm kind of echoing what the committee has discussed, even though I was not here last week or the last meeting. From a design standpoint, the town has been going through a series of redevelopments and upgrading, which has, in my opinion, enhanced the town because it has given people creativity to change the structures to offer different uses. And I think that that's one thing that has improved our town under the town controls of parking and obviously codes and all that. But I think it opens up a lot more creativity to add to the uniqueness of our town by rezoning rather than just existing structures.
I have a question about the existing structures that are there. Many of them are currently single story, correct? So I guess one thought that I would have is, would those structures all be allowed to become two-story? So in theory, could that whole section of that block that we're talking about become all two-story buildings?
The rules on floor area ratio govern how much developable area you can have on a parcel. These are smaller parcels, so we see that they are quite well developed for the size they are. I can't give you an answer with certainty whether one could go up or not, but it would all depend on whether there's available FAR or not. I did want to weigh in on some of the other questions I heard too, and that's as to the development standards. These parcels are different and smaller than we see in the other commercial zoning districts, and we have 3 other commercial zoning districts. So should these be rezoned, we may need to look at a new commercial district that has its own development standards as to setback and height and FAR, and uses as well, and that's why uses are included in the proposed language for the district. And then if redevelopment of the parcel is allowed, those would be the standards that apply, and since it would be a commercial structure, it would go first to the Zoning and Design Review Board for review as to whether it's consistent with the standards, for a recommendation to council for a decision. So that's the process that it would go through. So there is evaluation of those. It would be heard at a notice public hearing. But a lot of what that zoning district would allow is more conceptual at this point, and that's what the general plan is trying to get at. Whether commercial uses of a certain type are okay, and we're suggesting that it's the type of use that we don't see represented too much elsewhere in town, where it is more more traditional commercial, where you have your lodging, no restriction on commercial uses. This, by establishing a non-wine retail use, would do something potentially that we're missing or lacking in town, as well as an opportunity for more service or office uses. And even the boutique lodging is something that we don't really see other than the more bed and breakfast in the former Old Town Historic District.
So one of the opportunities of basically considering, and this is where, I mean, we're talking big picture now, considering down the road a different zoning district, is that you could set parameters in that zoning district that would be conscious and careful to protect the connection to Old Town.
Yes.
Right. So there'd be an advantage to have a separate zoning district at that point. So I just had one question in terms of looking at the survey that we saw initially. I mean, part of our earlier discussion was this might provide an opportunity for more either residential serving businesses, and I think we thought there would be fairly low impact if someone was living there and doing the work. But I see on here we have lodging or boutique lodging. It wasn't necessarily a popular option. One of the most popular options in the workshop. Is everyone in the committee comfortable with boutique lodging being an option that would be considered in that area?
No.
Yeah.
I think that needs to be clarified in a little bit more detail. That seems very broad, a broad scope to me. So the boutique lodging, like an example of it would be like Lavender House. Would that be considered boutique lodging? That kind of thing. These seem to be very small parcels for that, and I don't see how they could work there.
Another example could be Petit Logis, which is extremely small, has, I think, 5 or 6 small rooms that has a parking area in the back, but it's very small with a tiny little office, and it seems to work quite well. It's an interesting, small footprint.
In terms of the parking, though, there's a situation where you see, even with Petit Logis, you have a lot of parking, and so the question is on that part of town, where would so just a general question in terms of the impact of even boutique lodging that would require probably more parking than an option that might be a law office or a accounting office, where there might be limited people coming to the office at a time, which means there'd probably be limited parking through, a need for less parking. But
they would still have to follow the regulations for lodging parking.
Correct. And it wouldn't be feasible on all 6 of these parcels, but some of the larger ones could be viable candidates for it, provided they can meet the standards, and parking is one of them.
So there's one member that has a concern. Are there other members that have a concern or not?
I'm just thinking about, and I guess I would have to look at it, but what residential homes, meet up to these parcels? Because what kind of impact might that have?
I think making a new zoning district, or like Sandra was saying, I think would address concerns, because there are neighbors that back up to these properties, and I think that's why it's one of many reasons why she's suggesting that it would be a new zone.
In the subcommittee, was it discussed about the fact that we're trying to do something unique there with these changing and rezoning, or looking at different uses for this area? Is lodging, is that going in the same direction of the town, or are we really interested in a unique direction, which would be local-oriented businesses, small businesses, rather than business as usual, which is more of the lodging, that type of thing?
I agree there. I think one of the things that occurs to me is, if I read Nathan, what is that called? The surveys that we've taken. It seems as if the town is more interested in something that serves the town. It seems to me that we have quite a bit of lodging space, et cetera. And again, I don't want to harp on the parking, but I think that's problematic in a neighborhood. And I like the idea of this little kind of microcosm in Old Town that could be different, that could be unique. And I think that if you take this out of what we're trying to do, if you take this out of the general context of a visionary plan down the road, there are other moving parts to this, like later on we're going to talk about market-driven use caps. But I agree with Joel that I think this is a real opportunity for us to take a very small area, kind of re-identify it in terms of how the town currently views use, and see if we can't do something unique and different there that is a little more serving to the community rather than to the tourist community.
It does bring up it was a good point. We'll be talking about market-driven or use caps in the future. So the question is, when you talk about highest and best value, the likelihood is that it would probably move towards a lodging. You could imagine that it would, that the highest and best option that someone might consider would be lodging. So when you leave that option there, then you tend to that would influence probably a decision of someone. So we have Steve, you have a comment?
Yes, I wanted to address, I heard a question asked about what is the commercial interest, and I thought I would try to share with you as the recipient, along with Sandra, of a lot of the business inquiries and what's out there. What I'd like you to look at is more conceptual, and I think you need to look at the idea of if the space, and I think you need to look at if several of the parcels were acquired and redeveloped, I heard talks about flexibility, meeting the design, then you actually probably have more capacity to meet some of the interests. But we have, regularly we have requests for some traditional retail. We've also had some interest expressed in when we say boutique small, you may want to add a definition because one needs to look at what's realistic. Because one of the positive aspects, and I'm going to use, somebody mentioned petite logis, 5 rooms, nestled in, also one of our more affordable options. And I think one of the things that has been expressed by some is that a small bed and breakfast that is much more truer in keeping with a B&B, assuming it meets all of the appropriate parking requirements and various, we really don't have that. So I'm just saying we do have interest for that. We have great demand for regular retail. We just simply don't have it. Office, we have a lot of requests for, I'm a medical person, I'm a dentist, I'm a hairstylist, where can I go? So the challenge that I would also ask you, if you look at it, is many of those small homes really are not probably capable of being repurposed in the existing footprint unless they're, and this would take willing buyers and sellers, so I mean, it would more than likely. So the discussion you're having about redevelopment or not, I think is kind of critical, but we do have demand for interest in office and more traditional stuff. So I just, that is something we see often. But again, if you're really concerned about the hotel, my suggestion might be that you add a definition of under 9 or something like that, just so that you kind of manage the impact that you're talking about. And I would also encourage you that if you are interested in a new zoning district and those standards, you include that in the recommendation so that it's very clear.
Thanks, Steve.
So I wanted to speak for the subcommittee, and if I'm putting words in your mouth, let me know. But to answer your question, Joel, and then also, Mr. Chairman, I think we might need public comment, unless there's other comment following this. But to answer your question, we did discuss kind of the needs of the town and what we would like to see there. And like Steve was saying, we realized that there's a demand for office space, and so we kind of wanted to maybe drive the conversation that way. But then again, we also had a conversation about, do you let the market drive that, or do you put a cap on it and let the government steer it? So it's, we didn't come to a consensus on that necessarily, but we did appreciate that there was a need for office space. There's demand for office space.
During one of the discussions recently, I remember there being some conversation around a business incubator type of environment where you have little teeny businesses that are getting started and they need a little place to get started. I would see this as an ideal opportunity for that. I like the idea of a special zoning district just for this area where you could exclude large interests of all sorts and focus it on medical offices, office space in general, but also try and encourage new startup businesses to use this space while they're trying to get going.
I'm just curious if I'm reading this program correctly, that residential will only be allowed on second floor? And is that
The idea is
something
if
we
it's
want to limit?
rezoned to commercial, upon approval of a permit, that is, it would be required to convert to commercial, at least on the ground floor, potentially also the second floor. But any legal nonconforming use at that time could remain residential until such time as someone were to seek a permit for the use.
Thank you. I'll ask for public comment in a moment on this issue, but so I don't necessarily sense we have a consensus on the types of uses there, but I want to also just get a general sense, though, in terms of whether the committee thinks that we should allow redevelopment or just work with the existing structures. Are there comments about that, or a general do people generally feel, do they support this language, that we work within existing structures, or do you see that we should allow for redevelopment?
I'm in favor of allowing for redevelopment as long as it stays with the old town character.
I think we might need a vote.
Okay. Okay. So And do you feel, I guess, that may be the best thing in terms of either a question about uses and then the question about buildings, the structures, with the understanding at some point what we're talking about is really direction in the general plan, because at some point in the future through design or dezoning and all that, the staff would likely maybe create a different zoning district. Is there, I wanted to take a moment to open public comment on this particular discussion. Is there anyone in the audience that has a comment relative to a question about the North Washington residential zoning district changes? Please come forward. If you could please give your name and your address in town, then, okay, thank you.
Do I have to do this button? Okay. Okay, forgive my ignorance. I got here late. Are you talking between Padroni and Madison? And I'll give my name and address in a minute. Or are you talking north of there?
Could you give your name and your address?
Mary McCrae, 2020 Monroe.
Okay.
We're talking about the area between Creek and Padroni.
This is on Washington Street.
On Washington Street.
Basically north of the French Laundry to
Jessup
Padroni.
Cellars.
Okay.
Jessup, handwrittens.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other public comment or questions about the item? Hearing none, I'll close the public comment on this particular issue. Okay, so does the committee?
Question on the vote?
Yep.
Okay. You might want to make it 2 votes.
Right.
One for rezoning and one for redeveloping.
Okay. Okay, let's look first about, is there a motion on the table to accept this language or offer a different amendment in terms of the uses that would be allowed in this proposed North Washington residential zoning? So we'll talk about uses in a vote first, and then we'll talk about existing the structure or development of the property second in terms of a vote. If that's what the committee feels that that's what they'd like to do. And does staff have any recommendations or?
It's ultimately whatever a TAG member wants to motion. I guess first it would be worth considering if anyone wants to make a motion and then a vote to accept it as is written, the entire thing. Unless you want to break it out one section, then another
section. That's a good
section.
suggestion.
Can we just call for a straw poll type vote to get a feel, or do we need to vote on a motion?
Probably motion first.
Okay. So is there a motion on the table? And the easiest thing would be, is there a motion on the table to from someone that would suggest supporting the language as written?
So moved.
There's a motion to accept the language that we have from staff. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Comment? Questions? Okay, so we have a motion and a second to accept this language. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
No.
Nay.
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 So we have two ayes and my math.
2-7.
Two-
It fails on a 2-7 vote.
Okay, so the motion fails. Is there another motion or other suggestion on the floor?
Well, I can make a motion. I'd like some help with the language. So it's the ending of the phrasing there, within existing structures. Do you strike that? I'm not quite sure how.
If we're to strike that restriction that it's within existing structures, it would open it to potentially allow redevelopment.
But would you need to clarify? Would it be important to clarify and add language?
We can come up with the language next. If you're interested in having a vote, we can understand whether it's within existing structures or redevelopment. That's the preference.
How about using Lynn's in the character, or keeping with the existing Old Town character? Can that language be added? and the existing structures, as Boyd suggests, may be stricken?
We could do that. It could say within the existing structures or within redevelopment that is in keeping with Old Town character, if both were desirable.
Here we go.
So I would move to, I'm going to retract that motion.
I'd like to make a motion now. Is there someone else who'd like to make a motion?
Sorry. If anyone wants to simply continue the discussion, they can too. It doesn't need to be only entertaining motions right now.
Okay. We could also continue this to a later time if, unless there's a motion or an interest to try to make a decision tonight on this particular item.
I would make a motion that we accept the language as written, except to strike out lodging.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any questions or comment?
I again would comment that I would like to see preserving the Old Town character within that text somewhere.
Okay, so then I revise the motion to say we strike lodging and add within the existing structures or redeveloped as per Old Town character.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second from Carl, and you, Susan, you had initially a second. Do you accept the change?
I do.
Okay.
Can I hear that one more time, please?
I can read it.
But generally, we're talking about allowing.
So to rezone the remaining 6 residential parcels on the east side of North Washington from residential to commercial to allow office, service, or non-wine retail uses and second-floor residential within the existing structures or in redeveloped space in keeping with the Old Town character.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's
sort
clear.
of like that.
I thought we struck the existing structures. I thought we...
No, she's
Existing
amended
structures
that language to
or
say,
redevelopment.
or redevelopment in keeping with the character of Old Town.
okay.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Other questions or comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Is that enough direction on that item for you, right?
That's great. And when we bring this back to you, if we need to do any
clean it up.
wordsmithing, we will do that at that time. And then we'll also look at whether or not we need to come up with a new zoning district, and then we'll bring that forward as well at that time.
Thank you.
Is that something we need to discuss as a committee, the zoning district, or is that something that will be presented?
Well, the zoning district, when we bring all of the policies and programs back to you for one last review, as you know, there's a chart in the back of the matrix that has all of the zoning districts, and so that's where it will be added. There'll be a zoning district added. It will have a description of the uses. It will have a intensity of use designated for it, so a floor area ratio. But that's the extent of it. And then later on, the town will need to go and amend the zoning code in order to have all of the development standards for that zoning district. So that would happen after the general plan was adopted.
Thank you.
Okay. That's good. So maybe I didn't, one of the things that I would have liked to have discussed initially in terms of the agenda is I think we're all probably in agreement. We're trying to get to a meeting that probably lasts or ends somewhere near 9 o'clock, if that's what we generally support. So there is a hope that towards the end we will have a discussion on the vision statement. And I also think that not all of these issues will need the extensive discussion as we did on these. But so we're moving through. I don't want to limit discussion or comment or votes, but let's move forward to the second item.
Okay, so the second item is something that's been added to to this list, and since this came in just a few days ago, so I'm going to let Nathan or Sandra's going to go ahead and explain this one.
We're presenting another option to you tonight based on feedback or interest we have received from a property owner here in town. And the interest is to rezone these 2 vacant residential parcels to a commercial zoning district and use, and it's in recognition of the fact that the corner there touches upon the Washington Street commercial corridor, and that it's adjacent on Humboldt from 2 commercial parcels, one of which is in under redevelopment as we speak, under a building permit that started just a week ago. And that's a somewhat new zoning district, the purple, which has extended the residential scale commercial zoning district up to the corner and to the second parcel to the east on Humboldt. This map here represents the different zoning districts and what the proximity is to other uses.
Is the green wedge Vandeleur Park? I can't
It
quite
is,
read
yes.
Okay, and so the piece is across from Cindy Gates?
Yes, it's the Cindy Gates office, and then
The thing that got torn down,
yes.
surprisingly.
So this is Humboldt, and on that corner at Humboldt and Jefferson Street, on Humboldt, there's lots that are undeveloped. How many lots are undeveloped? Are there 2 lots that are undeveloped there?
2 adjacent lots are undeveloped. There is another one, but it's between the residential buildings, so that one wouldn't be.
So there's 3 parcels there, and
No, 2 really.
There's-
There's 3, but we're not considering the third because it's not adjacent to these 2.
No, that's what I'm saying, but in terms of what you're talking about, in terms of an experience, what we see there now is that there are 3 parcels there, and what we're discussing is the potential of 2 parcels being rezoned.
Yes.
From residential to commercial, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And next to the 2 parcels are built-out parcels?
Yes, it's not shown on this
Yeah.
map, but the parcel to the right of that blue line
Is a home.
is a home.
Oh, I'm
And
sorry,
it's
it's already
surrounded
developed.
by homes.
Mhm.
Right.
And then the vacant parcel is between that house and the other 2 houses that you see there at the end of the block.
Right,
Nathan, is it possible to get a Google Street View?
yeah. Yep.
What's an example of what they might want to do with it?
Well, again, it would be a smaller parcel, but it's not of the size that's unheard of for the commercial zoning district, so it could support retail or non-wine retail or office or service uses. And in the next slide, we are proposing some language to at least guide the discussion. The language is worded to consider rezoning of those parcels so that it doesn't have to be achieved as part of the general plan update, but it is a potential option in the future should the owners like to redevelop them.
Are you so right now it's consider rezoning. It's not necessarily a conversation about whether it would be residential scale or it would be maybe a potential new zoning district that would be connected to the North Washington. We're just talking about considering rezoning at this point.
Yes, however, in this case, based on the size of the parcel and the proximity to the residential scaled commercial zoning district, that is a real viable district for these 2 parcels.
Okay.
You said that you had interest from the property owner?
Yes, and the property owner is here tonight, and I'm assuming they'd like to speak during public comment portion.
Okay.
What size structures could be built on those parcels?
I want to go back and take a look at this. So it's a different configuration from Heston, but that is also a smaller parcel, so it shows what can be put on a smaller parcel with parking in the rear.
2-story, Heston is 2-story.
Mm-hmm.
2-story.
So residential scale commercial, does it have a use permit requirement so you could limit potential uses down Humboldt or on that parcel? I mean, in terms of non-wine, wine-related or...
Well, the residential scale commercial zoning district is different from the other 2 in that it has a whole category of uses that are allowed without use permit, and those are things like a bookstore or a florist. It's very specific in the zoning ordinance. For uses that are wine or food related, you need a use permit. Those could even be restricted on this parcel.
Okay.
So there's
some flexibility with the residential scale zoning to basically at some point, if there was that the council considered rezoning, that there would be latitude on the uses that would be allowed on Humboldt Street on those 2 parcels. Is there any comments from the TAG on this item that was added tonight?
So currently, the zoning is single-family residential? Is that what
It's
it is?
Old Town Historic,
Old Town Historic.
which is a residential neighborhood.
Right, okay.
My concern, and while recognizing that we have a demand for office space and community-serving businesses, my concern is I would want to make sure to limit some sort of slippery slope where all of a sudden, oh, well, my property is touching this one, and now this one gets rezoned, and this one gets rezoned.
Yep.
I recognize that this property doesn't, Washington turns at that point. It does appear that the corner does touch. I'm not opposed. I think it would be great, but again, just wanting to prevent a slippery slope.
Yep. The block that it's on is a residential block.
And it abuts to residential.
It's a concern. There are residential, I mean, we have residential scaled commercial with commercial backing,
Right.
to residential neighborhoods, but, it's, again, yes, it does touch Washington, and if we want to have a commercial
Fair.
walkable corridor, that's great. But that parcel is touching Washington. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's any other parcels that could be touching Washington, so as long as we can limit it to that, then
Other than the North Washington district we just talked about.
I still think parking is going to be a concern there. That's one of the strangest configurations for parking. And I've heard, and I've also heard complaints of, some of the employees that have to park somewhere, they use that street. So I'm not saying it couldn't be worked out. I'm only saying, again, and I don't want to turn out to be the parking bad boy here, but it's pretty obvious to me that's one of the oddest concepts for parking I know in town. You've got a one-way dumping into the very tip of Washington, as Boyd says, and then you've already got a crowded residential street, which is usually used by a lot of different folks who need to park somewhere that work here. So I'm not sure how it would be configured to accept a commercial.
And while it
there.
touches Washington, there's no real opportunity for the business, or commercial space to actually face on Washington because of the Vandeleur Park.
Right.
I mean, it's a strange.
Yeah, very strange.
Well, it can't be on Washington,
there's a piece of art blocking it, right?
Yeah.
but that's not private property. That's town property. So
Is it-
yes, that's why it has the piece of art on it.
Is there a limitation
can have the
relative
art.
to the housing element about, I'm not sure, it's the same question, I guess, with the North Washington about loss of residential housing. It's
This
so
would be
it's the
the
same
loss.
question for here as it would be for North Washington, that change.
Well, no, up in North Washington, we would potentially be losing actual residential housing units, whereas here it's zoned residential, but there is no loss of units provided. It just simply hasn't been developed yet. There's always so much flexibility with a zoning ordinance to require that the building face Washington, even at an angle, and to require parking off of Humboldt so that there are no conflicts on that one-way street, and to tuck parking behind. So a lot of those issues could be sorted out during development. You are looking at the loss of one, maybe two on-street parking spaces for a driveway connection. Those are all of the items that are evaluated during a development proposal to make sure that it would be appropriate for the site.
This is
And with this
also-
little
oh, I'm
impact
sorry,
on
go ahead.
residential. Sorry.
No, I apologize. This is also a Humboldt Street property, is not a Washington Street property.
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
It is. I mean, its address
address Humboldt.
is a Humboldt Street
And
address.
when we consider the Washington corridor as a walking path, commercial zone, this feels like it's now creating a new commercial zone of Humboldt. And the slippery slope would be, Cindy Gates is now doing commercial next to her. Now we're going to have something across, then again and again and again and again. All of a sudden we have Humboldt now as an artery off of Washington, and we don't have just our Washington Street commercial corridor. I think that's the slippery slope.
Well, I think there are some limitations, though, because there's the two lots from the corner going in. There's a new residential house that's not going to go anywhere, and the residential houses on the other corner. So I don't foresee that being an issue as far as changing that.
The two houses next to Cindy Gates, though, going down Humboldt?
Right. No, on the other side, on
that side. But if you keep going down this side, you could get a whole nother commercial street going all the way to the corner.
I agree with the slippery slope concept. This is an edgy thing. When you've got a nice hard line that says Washington Street is it, okay? That it's very easy to enforce. The problem is we're trying to look at Yountville over the next 20 years. And I think we've got to allow some slippery slope and hope it gets controlled or find a way to control it in the way we define the zone.
Is there, on the second unit behind Gates Real Estate, there's a residential on the second floor, is that correct? Is there that requirement that there's...
Right, so the building that's under development right now will be first floor office, and there's an apartment on the second floor. Looking at the end of this block, there is a single-family house to the east with a second dwelling tucked in that corner. And then there's a house on the corner, and that's a single-family residence. And then around the corner on Yount is another single-family residence. So those are three single-family parcels.
Can there be a requirement that there be house or residential on a second floor for in that district? Is that an option for?
Well, the way the zoning or the design ordinance is drafted is that in the residential scale district, you can have 25% FAR, and there's an additional 15% available for second floor office or second floor residential. And we found, I would say in 100% of the cases, that property owners avail themselves of that. As long as they can meet the parking standard, it allows them maximum use of the property. So at the Heston parcel, the newly developed tasting room, there's a residence above. At Stewart, there's a residence above. At Priest Ranch, there's a residence above.
Okay.
Handwritten, there's a residence above.
Says
Also, too, while there are two parcels here, they're small 6,000 square foot parcels, which is, or I think they're about 6,000 square feet. So it is more likely that it would be viable if these two parcels were merged and it's a single development rather than two smaller developments. But buildings would still be residential in scale, so smaller buildings.
So does it actually touch Washington? I mean, are we this is a unique configuration here. I mean, is that parcel
Physically,
on three
no.
streets? I mean, is it on
Physically,
Jefferson and
it touches
Humboldt?
Jefferson and Humboldt. It doesn't touch Washington, but it's oriented in that toward that area.
What they mean. I think we've kind of heard consensus on this.
You've heard?
I feel like I have, yeah.
Well, make a.
Do we need to make a motion on this?
Is there? Do I sense it? I don't sense necessarily. I've heard from everyone. Is there a consensus on this issue from the tag? And if there is, then.
Did I hear somebody say that the owner was in the audience and might like to speak?
Yeah, I would just. Thank you very much for reminding me. So. Let's go ahead and open a public hearing for this item, and we'll try to limit public comment to 2 minutes for each person speaking. So, is there anyone that would like to speak to this item in the audience tonight?
Hi, my name is Rich Woodson. I'm the resident of the new residential development that you saw that would be abutting this property. And the two lots that are in question belong to my parents. They are actually two lots. When we read the Envision Yountville mission statement and looked at what the town was trying to do, we thought this was probably a good opportunity for this unique property to augment the existing corridor along Washington Street. You know, when you come in from the perspective of a visitor to the town, or as a resident of the town itself, when you're walking along there, there's quite a bit of traffic, tourist and residential, that go up and down that sidewalk there. And it would be kind of odd to have, we certainly thought about putting a house there, but it would be kind of odd to have a house there. And it seems more consistent with the rest of the feel of the town if there were, a business there, which would be oriented, I imagine, sort of like an L shape oriented towards Washington Street, with an ingress, maybe around that piece of art or something like that. They are 2 lots. We always considered that, if this were to go commercial, we'd have to sacrifice one of the lots to accommodate off-street parking, which we realize is increasing pressure in the town, and we feel it acutely living on that street. So, that's kind of our perspective.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment for this item. So just remember, this item says consider rezoning. So there's that obviously a question that would be addressed down the road for a future council. So is there a motion or a consensus from the committee on this item?
I'd like to make a motion to amend the proposed amendment. I guess it's not an amendment yet, but the
language here before us.
Amend the language to add at the end, using the same restrictions as exist on the North Washington residential zoning area. That way we truly limit what can go in there.
I'll second
but
that.
I think,
so to clarify, you're talking about the uses.
yes,
The use restrictions.
usage restrictions, okay? We don't need another lodging there. Not going to make enough lodging. It's not enough space. But it is an opportunity for more of this future serving businesses that are not the same as everything else in town. It gives us a chance to change things around.
I have one more comment. I disagree with you a little bit, Carl, because the 2 lots can be combined, and with lodging or anything else, small lodging, as was said, parking can be accommodated using that formula where the 2 lots are combined for one usage.
So you're saying leave it as straight residential?
So now the residential scale commercial zoning, residential scale that we have on that side we have Petit Logis. Does it allow lodging as an option now, or?
No. It doesn't allow lodging on the east side of the street. And the way this is worded, too, we were restricting it to non-wine retail. The RSC district allows a whole host of retail uses with wine or food.
Because
Sure,
that property does back up to homes behind it, I guess one thing I'm just thinking about is if there was some kind of retail service that was just open, during the daytime, then there wouldn't be any kind of nighttime noise infringing on the residents that live right there. Whereas if there was, for example, lodging or something, you've got people coming in and out, coming back from dinner late and that kind of thing, could, maybe be bothersome to the residents that are right there.
Yeah, that's why we've worded it like this, although I note we've omitted office, which could be included.
Okay. So maybe before we take a vote, let's find out here, is there general consensus in support of the language as it's stated?
I just want to clarify again, if it does go to commercial, it still would allow for a second-story residential unit to be on it. Is that correct?
I believe we should state that because there's no guarantee it would be residential scale commercial, although that makes the most sense.
I would be in favor of that because I think, again, we're looking for residential dwellings for people to occupy.
And so it would be, in the end, the consideration possibly in the future for rezoning would be like residential scale, where there'd be an FAR bonus if there was residential on a second floor through that zoning district.
Yes.
Are we looking at this in the exact same way that we looked at the last section? It's Old Town and the North Washington, we're saying the same thing.
I just don't think this is commercial area. I really think this is a residential area. I think it abuts up to all residential. It's not on the Washington Street corridor. I'd be very concerned if this parcel became commercial, that whole street will become commercial, and that's not what I would like to see for Yountville. Again, letting commercial continue to grow is fine in the Washington Street corridor, but this is not in the Washington Street corridor.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I as well.
Okay. Is there a motion to accept some of this language, or a motion to continue this discussion to a later date?
Can we get clarification on staff? So this new program is just like what's in the matrix now, is that right?
Yes.
So we would have to make a decision on this.
Right. So based off what people have discussed, we added a few little things to clarify. If we wanted to entertain motions to continue this, not continue it, but to adopt it, we could do this language that I put up. If it fails, then discussion's over. It's done.
So I was under the impression that there was a motion on the floor. Didn't Carl get a second?
I withdraw that motion in favor of this. That's basically what I was saying.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you for that. So there is a motion on the table. Is there a second for that motion to accept this language as written?
I second.
You made the motion.
Second your own motion.
I thought you made the motion.
So is there a second to accept this motion?
I'll second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is there any more comment or questions? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of the motion, of the language as presented to us, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Let's
we may
clarify.
We might need to do either a roll call vote or show of hands.
So those that are in favor of the language, please raise their hands.
5, 4.
And those opposed?
Fails on a 4-5.
Fails?
It fails on a 4-5 vote.
Okay. Is there any other discussion? Okay, if not, we'll move forward on this item. Staff have any suggestions, or just?
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I move to not rezone the 2 vacant residential parcels on the northeast intersection of Humboldt Street and Jefferson Street from residential to commercial.
Okay, there's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
Second.
Comment, questions?
Is this necessary?
Right. It's not necessary.
It's not really necessary, is it?
The fact that the last one failed can be interpreted as no program.
Thank you. So the
Sorry, that's why I was wondering. Okay, got it.
Thank you. The zoning is currently Old Town
necessary.
Historic, so it is what it is right now. So, okay, thank you for the discussion on this item. Let's move on to the next item.
Okay, we'll move on to the next one, which is the North Agricultural Parcel. And so this is a 33-acre parcel, and we've had quite a bit of discussion about it here back in November, and then we also discussed it at the workshop. And at the workshop, we went through a bunch of different ideas of it's currently zoned agricultural. It would allow a winery on the property under the existing land use designation and zoning district. And at the workshop, we discussed, kind of presented a bunch of different ideas, including residential, which is what is shown here. We also looked at perhaps having some lodging or a hotel or kind of a hotel spa, doing that in concert with additional housing. And a couple of things, to the north or the northeast edge of this parcel, there is a flood zone. There's also a view corridor. So that is really the reason why when it was kind of this, and this is just conceptual, of course, in this sketch, we kept that free of development in that area in order to kind of accommodate the floodplain and to preserve the view corridor. And then we also had this discussion about adding some parks here. This also kind of considering putting a dog park here perhaps, and then including some other pathways and bikeways through the parcel that would connect with existing parcels or pathways to the west of the parcel. So, okay, so we didn't. So this is one of those items that we had. We had the groups break out and do the table exercises, and then everyone reported back. And when we went through all of those responses, and I don't know how many of the TAG members were there at the workshop, but really the majority of the feedback that we got was in support of keeping this or rezoning this perhaps in the future to residential uses. So what we've done is we've drafted a new program for consideration, and it says to consider rezoning the 33-acre north agricultural parcel to allow mixed residential development and associated facilities. Now, there's a couple of things I want to mention. The reason we have consider here is that currently, and we're going to talk more about the housing element next month, but currently, the town has 2 parcels that it's relying on to provide affordable housing for lower-income households. And one of those is the church property, the Catholic church property. And then the other one is the French Laundry garden site. And so the town has a requirement to provide 6 units affordable to lower-income households. 2 of those have already been developed. That means there's a remaining need for 4 housing units. And this is just for this housing element cycle, which runs through 2023, the beginning of 2023. So if either of those, so at the church parcel, there is, in the housing element, it identifies 3 lower income units that would probably be achieved there, and then 15 units, and all of which would be affordable to lower income at the French Laundry garden site. Now, if either of those parcels are developed and they're not developed with housing, then it's going to require the town to find another site in order to replace one of those sites, because in either case there would be, it's called there's a no net loss rule. So, and then we also have, when the next housing element cycle comes, the town is not allowed to, there's a new state housing law, so the town cannot carry forward vacant sites that have been on 2 previous housing elements. So there will probably also be a need, if there's not a need before the housing element is the next cycle begins, there will probably be a need after that in order to zone some other land for residential use. So this would be a site that could be considered for that, in order to, in addition to just providing housing for the town, needed housing at all income levels, that this could also be a potential site that could be used in the land inventory of the housing element. So we've worded here to consider rezoning the 33-acre north agricultural parcel, and that really would, unless the committee wanted to just to do it now, which is, of course, a potential. But this would allow it to at least kind of put it on the table, so that in the future, if the site's needed for housing, particularly if it's needed for housing to address the housing element requirements, then it would be something that the town could pursue, because there would be a program in the general plan, or a policy in the general plan to consider doing this.
I have a question.
Yes.
So from the previous information you gave us through to tonight's matrix, the change was from rezone to consider rezoning.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so that was,
it's
less of a hard a question here. It's more, it's for the council to consider rezoning in the future. Okay.
That's right. Now, again, if the TAG wanted, you could say that you actually think the recommendation is to just rezone it now in the general plan, but staff's recommendation is to add the consider.
Thank you.
Just for clarification, this is for basically putting on paper that if the owners ever decided to sell or do something with it, the town would have some control over what happens.
Well, the town...
but the town can't force this issue. It would just be if that we'd have wording in place to have
the town
direction that it would go.
could decide to do it at any time. It wouldn't have to be triggered if the existing owner wanted to sell the land.
But the town can't tell the owner that we're going to that we're going to take the property.
Well, by having the program in the general plan, it kind of puts the owner on notice that this is something that would be might be
I
coming
can
down the road.
share that we've met with the property owner just a week ago to let them know what the discussions have been at the community workshops and here at the TAG meetings, and their long-term goal is to farm the property, so they don't have any immediate plans. I lost my train of thought. However, in the future, let's say with the next housing cycle that the town does rezone it to residential, that's not a taking from the applicants or the owners, because they can still farm it for as many years as they'd like. It's legal non-conforming. They can continue that, but it creates an opportunity that should they wish to redevelop it themselves or to sell it, that is a new option for the property as well. And a new buyer even would be permitted to maintain it as a farmed property.
Oh, they would? The legal non-conforming can carry over to a new owner?
Yes.
Oh, I thought it switched out.
No. No, because uses run with the land, so they're entitled to continue using it in a legal non-conforming manner.
Oh. And if we put this amendment program in that says consider, it means that this committee is saying we want it to be considered, we think it's a good idea, or it's just saying we think it should be a discussion?
We think it should be a discussion over the term of the 20-year general plan.
There's something about this that just is making me very uncomfortable. I would like us to not consider rezoning and just leaving it zoned agricultural as it is now. My thinking is that down the road, if the owner wanted to sell or do something else, then at that point, could that process then not take place?
Yes, the general plan can always be amended. There is a state law that it can only be amended 4 times a year. We don't run into that limit here in town because we're so small. So let's say the next housing element rolls around in 2023 and the state rejects the properties that we've used in the past, we could then consider rezoning it at that point.
Then I would propose that we that we strike this.
So now the question in terms of what staff is suggesting is that there's a legal non-conforming use, and so leaving it agricultural zone means that a property owner could, by legal non-conforming use, always farm it, but they could come in with a winery or related winery use. Considering zoning it residential means, just like the Catholic Church property, that we're stating a policy in our general plan that we believe it's that the property at some point in the future should, I guess, in essence, either continue to be farmed agricultural or be converted to residential. And so that's generally what
Can I clarify that a little bit? The Catholic Church property is actually zoned for mixed residential use.
That's what I meant. I'm sorry, did I not? Yeah, that church property, I meant to say the Catholic Church property is zoned residential. It can be farmed as long as the property owner or another buyer would want to farm it, but it would, the zone, underlining zoning is residential. Is there any other comments, or?
I guess I'm a little bit confused because I heard a couple of different things from Sandra and from Christine. Christine, you were saying that we had to have a certain amount of affordable housing by law. We have to provide a certain amount.
You have to have adequate sites that will allow or facilitate the development of affordable housing, and you have a requirement for the number of units.
Okay. Does the church property meet that?
So the church property is one of the sites that's listed in the housing element in order to meet that. And there are assumptions that are made in the housing element, and it says that there would be, I think the potential for that property, I forget now, I think it's 15 total units is what they were projecting because of the floodplain. So they were just looking at the development potential in the area that's out of the floodplain, and then made an assumption that most of those would be market rate units and affordable to moderate or above moderate households, and that 3 of them would be deed restricted and affordable to lower income. So that's where the 3 comes from.
Okay. So basically, we've met the criteria with just that property, I guess, is what I'm asking.
There's a remaining need of 4 units.
4
So
additional?
it's not just that property.
Okay.
So that's where the French Laundry Garden site comes.
Okay.
And that's
what
for,
was confusing me. Okay.
come up, Steve. That is for the current housing cycle, which runs through 2023. And of course, the term of this general plan is to run 1 or 2 housing, or 2 or 3 housing element cycles beyond that current plan.
Just a moment, Steve, real quickly. There's a question from Boyd.
Mr. Town Manager.
Town Manager, sorry, just one moment. I'm sorry, thanks.
I'll yield to Steve.
Okay.
No, I just wanted a clarification point that I want. Sandra, my recollection is that the council has taken action to actually rezone the French Laundry Garden property to commercial.
It is commercial, that's what I'm...
And that so the reason I'm sharing that is that property, when we go through our next cycle, will not be in, which actually puts us in need for another potential. I do want to suggest that when you're looking at this, again, you're looking at the potential, not the guarantee. And what I would say, similar to what Chair Knight commented, you're really signaling that if the property isn't going to be continued as agricultural, and that's at the determination of the property owner, then you would like to see it be mixed residential or something else. But I wanted to clarify the French Laundry Garden situation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So yes, the French Laundry Garden is zoned primary commercial. We have been counting it in our housing element. Frankly, that's because we're stretching so hard to try to find parcels that can accommodate housing, and that's one of very few vacant parcels in town.
So I like the change, I like the change from rezone to consider rezoning because there's more flexibility for council, but that there are going to be future issues that the council may have to consider with the state housing. But I think there's also a broader question that we broached a little bit in the past that I think it's important to discuss, is that all the cities in this county have made a commitment to the Board of Supervisors to keep agriculture, to protect the agriculture in the valley, and Measure J and Measure P do that, but it's to keep a successful agricultural economy continuing. And because of that, and the relationship the county has with the state, they are constantly working, all the cities are working to provide housing in the city limits of the towns for the people that work and the requirements the state have, but to provide housing for people that work in the valley. So I like the language that says consider. There's some consideration so the council will consider it, but I really feel there's a responsibility. Personally, I have a hard time. I don't think in a small town we should have any property zoned agricultural when we are surrounded by by the Napa Valley and agriculture and wineries, and that I think for me, I think it's important that we continue the commitment as the other cities with the county to find housing in the city limits and to protect the agricultural resources in the county unincorporated areas. And that's why I support this language. I like the change to consider, because I think at some point the council will have to consider that. It again doesn't affect the property owner. The Hoxies, the Palissa family has farmed this land for many years, and they can continue to farm it. They could sell the property and farm it, and someone else could continue to farm it into the next century. But I think we have some responsibility to consider the needs of the people that work in this valley. So anyway, are there other comments?
Just a clarification. If it's left agricultural, that means the owner, and I might be off, but my recollection is they can do anything that is connected with their industry. They could put cold storage, they could put large structures that offer services to their industry. And by rezoning, we're saying if it changes, that can't happen.
Right. I'll let Nathan.
Yeah, well, I just put on the screen, you might remember this image from a previous public workshop where this was considered or addressed. Under current zoning, a development that could occur is a full-blown winery or similar to Domaine Chandon. If it is rezoned, that means keep it as farming, but then if you choose to develop, that development needs to conform with whatever the zoning is. It's not forcing anyone to develop. It's just saying when you choose to develop, if you do, it needs to conform with the zoning.
If they did, let's say, want to build a winery there, would the town, though, not be able to impose limits on the size and structure and everything that would go on that property?
The town could. It would require a master development plan with use permit and design review approval. So both the ZDRB and the council would weigh in on whatever structures and access and circulation and all aspects of that development.
So I feel like what I'm looking at there is an unlikely scenario then. Because if they did want to develop it, the town wouldn't want to see something of that size and scale.
Well, under current zoning, if they submit a plan that meets the FAR requirements and the setback requirements, the town can't come in and say, no, but we don't want a winery there. That's what a rezoning would do. If you keep the zoning as it is, it's saying we're okay with the winery there.
I have several comments to make. First off, I agree with Eric that changing the wording, just to put consider in there, has made this a far more acceptable statement to me. I do have a couple of concerns. One is a conflict with Objective 12, specifically 12.2, discourage the redesignation of agricultural land within the town limits except where it can be found that the project will, and then there's a whole list of things that it has to meet in order to be considered to be rezoned. Okay? That seems to handle this issue quite well in a much stronger manner. Secondly, to me, when I look at all the different zonings, agricultural zone is about the most restrictive zone there is. There is really only two things you can do: farm it or build farm-related or wine-related structures. It's really pretty tightly restricted beyond that. Residential can be anything from multifamily, low-income housing to one acre lots that have multi-million mansions on them. There's a wide open list of things you can do with it if it's zoned residential. Would we be better off to leave it as agricultural until we have a specific plan?
And I would clarify that the rules in the design ordinance would not allow houses on 1 acre parcels. They would still have to comply with the existing development standards for housing.
And right now, we have a lot size limit of 8,000 square feet in our current zoning document, isn't it?
8,000, potentially 12,000.
8 to 10,000.
8 to 10,000, yeah. So it would be consistent with Yountville's development pattern of smaller houses on smaller lots.
I have a question. Currently, as it's written, would there only be housing, or could there be any sort of supporting? Is it just housing, whether it's low income or?
We've presented it as mixed housing, which could be apartments or single-family residences, and then the support facilities such as parks and paths, et cetera, but it wouldn't allow commercial or lodging or other more intensive uses.
So my concern then would be if in fact you're going to accept rezoning it to residential, if you've made that step, then you have to look at from public services standpoint. You're adding more residents, you're adding more more houses, more sewer, water connections, and that costs money to the town. And you'll certainly get a tax revenue from property tax on those properties. However, is that going to be enough to support those residents? We all know that we have an issue with funding the town outside of TOT. And so my concern is if you increase the population of the town without adding some sort of tax revenue aside from property tax, that there could be some sort of conflict there. Now, this may not be acceptable to the group, but one of the options that was thrown out there was to put some sort of hotel lodging component along with some housing. To me, it was framed as similar to, I believe, Solage, where up in Calistoga, where Solage has a hotel component with spa services, etc. But they also have, I believe at Solage, the housing there is low income or affordable housing. I would be more in favor, if we're going to make the jump of rezoning it, to do it in a smart way and say, look, we need to, if we're going to increase the population of our town, and I agree with what Eric says, we do need to have housing for folks that work here and affordable housing. But if we're going to do that, we've got to address the services that the town needs to provide those folks: public safety, fire, police.
Well, when we're talking housing as well, we are only talking a specific number of units that are affordable within the housing that would be there. Is that correct? So again, we're creating the housing, but what is the cost going to be in addition to, are we really creating for the workers of the community? Because if there's only 4 units that are affordable, then who's going to buy the other units?
I would share that our housing obligation, which is known as RHNA, our Regional Housing Needs Allocation, is for all income levels. So it includes very low, moderate, and above moderate. So we need to accommodate all housing in the community.
And if development was to occur, the question was brought up earlier on, well, does the town have any control? You can put conditions that whatever development needs to contain that mix of income level housing, such that the mixed residential zoning district would provide.
I'm sorry, Susan?
As I understand it, the town has a need for certain number of units within a date frame to the 2023 and such. It seems that the discussion is suggesting that this property is going to be changed in our lifetime, and I'm just thinking it might not. So are we a town that needs to go up rather than out to provide those required units? Or it seems like too much attention is being given to the property when it's possibly not going to happen, that any change will occur.
I'm going to address that comment first, and then I'm actually going to go back and answer the potential manager Boyd Dennington's question about how do we pay for everything, because it's a couple processes that we go through. The first, in theory, Susan, I think you bring up a really good question, which is we have a limited footprint and our incorporated limits with which to meet our combined housing variety of service needs. And if we're not willing to look at developing the existing parcels, then you're absolutely correct. We run the risk that the only way to potentially meet the development requirements is to go up. And we have generally I think it's fair to say our community likes a lower height limit. So I think this becomes one of those balancing questions for the community on if we're trying to maintain certain aspects of the character. And again, we're looking at if and when, not that it's immediate, but I just say, and then, most of you can drive around town. We're down to a handful. I mean, you can put them on one finger in terms of vacant lots. So development potential is very challenging in this community. But I actually now, so that's just your point at some point, and it may not be in this 5-year cycle, but at some point the community could be forced with a different conversation. And I don't want to be alarmist, but one of the consequences, and it'll probably come up in the discussion when we talk about the housing element, but if you have a housing element that is found to be not in compliance with state law, one of the consequences is that the state can restrict your ability to issue building permits. So it has some real, there's some real consequence to just pretending we don't need to deal with it. But to Vice Chair Dennington's question, the cities go through on about a 7-year cycle what is known as a municipal service review, where we work with an independent review with Napa County LAFCO. And one of the intents of these studies is to assess whether we're, one, adequately providing the services that we're responsible to under law and in conformance with a variety of processes. And then secondly, to look at what the impacts of the potential development would be. The good news scenario in Yountville's case is that when you're looking at, and I know this is going to sound strange when I say it, but a 33-acre parcel is very large for Yountville, but in the scale of development, it's not really very big. So in today's modern environment, almost all of the development cost is pushed onto the developer. And really that's no different. The folks in Washington Park may, those properties were orchards before they were developed. So there's a progression in town where the existing retained ag slowly has been developed to meet the community's need. But when we look at that assessment, so when you really look at, is there going to be a revenue stream adequate to support, the first thing I would go back and say, if we actually had to comply with modern LAFCO requirements, Yountville would not be allowed to incorporate because our property tax base and core revenues are not sufficient to meet the public service needs. So I'm just going to put that straight out there, pretty flat. We've been successful as a business entity by nurturing a abnormal revenue stream. We've had councils that took some vision at a point in time and developed an economic model that actually provides a revenue stream. But if we were simply to look at it. So the good news for Yountville is we have the incremental capacity. The development of that site is not going to push our water resource capability. It's not going to push the capacity of the treatment plant. There are some things to do. And the incremental, if you think about the social structure element, the parks and rec facilities, assuming that the facility has a park developed and is integrated into our network, we're not talking about things that overwhelm the capacity of the existing structure. But a very good question, and I really do appreciate that because in a raw sense, in many cases, development by itself simply does not meet, but in this case, balanced with our existing revenue stream and in compliance with some of the things we need to do with our RENA, I think mixed residential with some caveats that was a concern you have. And again, you're talking about not tomorrow, but you're talking about a signal of if and when the property owner might want to exercise. Just like if you look around, we have a number of properties that people have had a right to do something with and they chose not to do anything.
Thank you. let's see. Let me go ahead and open up public comment for items. I'm sorry. One moment here. I'll take one more question from the committee, and then I'll open public comment.
Thanks. You know, in listening to this is, in my humble opinion, I think we have already, in the short term, we have the church property that's already zoned to benefit the affordable housing that we may need by 2023. I think what's really scary about this, at least to me, is if you walk out here and you've lived here for a while, it's so beautiful to look at. And so when you think about, at least for myself, when I think about developing this, I see the pros and cons of it. I heard Nathan say something that I think would be really important for someone like myself, which is you could have this amendment, but at the same time you could put restrictions on it so that it wouldn't look like we've seen where it's one big mass. It's not a Washington Park. In other words, it could be built in a way that, as Boyd suggests, would allow for a small amount of office or small amount of commercial, but it doesn't need to be mega mansions. It doesn't need to be real dense. And so why I say it's scary is because nobody's really sure if that, in the context of, the out time we have until that discussion or that decision, nobody really can say what will happen. If Susan's right, we'll all be, somewhere else because they'll still be farming and it'll all be cool. But at the same time, I think there is a need, as you've suggested, and I think most people would agree, we need some form of housing. I think it's within our grasp right now at the church property. And if what we're talking about is using the word consider as the key, then maybe what I'm saying is I can consider it potentially down the road as long as I feel confident and believe that the town will put in the right type of restriction so it's not scary. So it maintains that beautiful feel of, an expanse that looks all the way out to Stag's Leap. I mean, it's really beautiful. It's a profound thing. A lot of tourists go there too. I mean, it's not just me and the dog walkers. So that's my humble opinion.
I'm going to go ahead and open public comment from anyone in the audience that has comments about this particular objective. If you could give your name and your address, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Zagorczyk. I live on 1953 Yountville Crossroad. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for making this such an inclusive process. It's my first time going through something like that. I attended the workshop in November, and just the dialogue and discussion I found really invigorating. I mean, it makes me just appreciate the town because everybody's really putting their heart and soul into it. So I just wanted to thank you in that process. When my wife and I considered coming here about 6 years ago, I actually studied the general plan at the time, and I was really blown away by how thoughtful and meticulous it was. So to be in the process of discussing it now is rewarding. And one of the areas that stood out to me was the agricultural parcel and the North Block. And it was the spirit, I think, of how it was written was it's very rare to have such beautiful agricultural property within the town limits. We're proud of it, and we really want to preserve that. And it was really that diversity, the mentality of that diversity that really stood out to me, that said we want to be a town for tourists, we want to be a town for residents, we want to be a town for kids, and we want to be a town that celebrates the wineries and the vineyards. And so when we came here, that was further rewarded because we can just see how people are so close. Walking up Yount Mill Road and Yountville Cross, you can see the resident. It's the place where residents and tourists are commingling. I've lived all over. People say hi to each other because they're just so happy to have access to this incredible space within minutes. So I think it brings a lot of joy, and it's the spirit, I think, that went into that original plan that's manifested itself in one of the areas that it's sometimes hard to measure. And when I attended the workshop in November, I was heartened because my sense was a lot of the groups supported that. That was the feedback. I noticed that I didn't see the the poll results for that particular, did we get those?
No, there weren't, that wasn't a click poll question.
That was a tabletop exercise, so it didn't have.
But it was I see. There was a question, maybe I'm not recalling, but I watched everybody intently because it's a passionate topic of mine, and I really saw people supporting that and expressing their own version of what that meant. And the last thought, I was recalling a comment that was made about slippery slope, how putting conditions and considerations on the table. Say, hey, we're not going to do anything. Let's just make it an option, but it's an option that's one step closer. But I've learned a lot in this process too about standards and guidelines and what the state of California and regions actually need. And we have a real dichotomy because it seems as though the various stipulations and meeting the standards require growth. They say, well, you don't have enough of these housing needs, so you must grow. You must add. It's almost like you have to spend money to save money, right? And when I think about the unique characters that Yountville has, I'm not sure whether or not those broader-based stipulations accounted for the incredible unique space that we have here, with all the thousands and thousands of towns and urban areas across the state. So, to me, it was really a question of the spirit, the intent, maintaining that diversity and that perspective in the plan, knowing that if the need is immediate, that this is an area that will potentially stay static for the next X number of years. That in and of itself is an opposition of that immediacy versus the preservation, and ultimately what I think helped put Yountville on the map. So I just wanted to share that perspective.
Thank you.
I'll be brief. I'm Megan Mason. I live at 5 Heritage Court, and I'm pleased to say I've lived here 30 years and love this parcel of land, like probably all of you do. So it concerns me greatly to put any kind of open contingencies of developing it. I would tend to go. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, the lady down here, about taking it even off of the plate as being a consideration. I'd like to think that not only do locals enjoy this parcel, you can tell every day, whether it's tourists, locals, it is so integral to Yountville. And I'd really just like to have that whole taken off and look at other things for future. And I do wonder when does one get, how much more can we grow or do housing? I mean, look at Carmel or places that are pretty much maxed out. How do they deal with it when they're trying to keep their size and their charm and are limited by space? What do such towns? You can probably answer that. Yeah, go up. Okay. But I think just preserving what we have is really integral, and I know that's why you're all here. And so that's my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. One moment. Is there any other public comment on this issue? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the committee.
Yeah, my only concern is that we're discussing something. We're not discussing incorporating more land into the city. We're discussing the city dynamics, and which is already in the city limits. And so we're not taking away, we're not incorporating more agricultural land into the city. It already exists in the city. And I think that if we don't do anything, we open ourselves up to have no control over future development. If the owners choose to sell, the town has less control if we do nothing. If we do something or wording it in some way, at least the town has some control on how it is developed. And that's my concern, is if we do nothing, that the potential development would be different than what the town envisions.
I think Carl made a good point that, and do I have my the rest of the objectives that, and I made a note too, that on page 25, 12.2, there's language that I think works with the language we have here, that basically states that discourage the redesignation of agricultural lands within the town limits except where it can be found that the project will, and there's 5 conditions: generate substantial overriding public benefit in compliance with other goals and policies of the general plan, benefit the public health, satisfy and the last one being satisfy the town's obligation to provide housing and infill development under Measure P. So, but the overriding language in 12.2, and that's under agriculture, and our comments is discourage the redesignation of agricultural lands within the town except where these findings may be found. So right now the language has changed from rezone to consider. We have this one that says discourage, addressing some of the issues we've all talked about that the future council would consider. I guess I'm aligning myself with Carl's comments that there seems to be protection in this language, but flexibility for the council in the future to have more control over the parcel, the use. So,
are you talking about the protection in the 12.2?
12.2, that remaining basically sets a standard that says discourage the redesignation of agricultural lands except under these conditions, which are important conditions. I mean, our obligation under Measure J in our relationship with the county is to provide housing within the town limits of Yountville. So but at least it states to that point, it creates a conversation with the future council that there's this both statements and something they'll have to consider in the future. So is there any, generally from the committee, is there a consensus or other comments? Thank you.
But if you look on 12.2, it also says revise as noted to address the obligation for infill. So there was an addition going to be recommended to that, to 12.2.
And that's the one we're considering.
The town's obligation. I think that's what it was.
And I think what that comment over there in the comments is what we're considering today under this new program. And so, and the language changed from rezone to consider rezoning, what we've seen that was the change tonight.
So I have a comment, and it goes back to one of our very first meetings and something Christine said, and we have a balance that we have to achieve here, and I'm seeing that here. Some folks want to preserve the land. It's got view corridors, people walk their dogs out there. We also have a need for housing. I think that there's a potential to accomplish both of those things. There's a floodplain on the western part of that parcel that was proposed to be a park. So if there was housing put there, it wouldn't necessarily be dense, the whole property, being housing. There would be park area, so view corridors would be maintained and people could still enjoy the property, and we could meet a housing need if the Palissas sell.
Or if someone comes forward, and assuming that there's a zoning change, so in the future by a future council. Is there, let's see, direction from the committee?
Can't support it.
Okay, so let's go ahead, and I'm not sensing that we're going to get consensus on this, so is there a motion, unless there's more comment for discussion, is there a motion on the table to and the easiest one would be first was to consider accepting this language? Is there a motion? Well, that's interesting. Okay.
I'll move to consider adopting the language as it's written.
Is there a second? I'll second that. You'll second the motion, Joel? Okay. So there's a motion and a second. Other comments or questions on the motion? Although, let's take,
Sorry. Go ahead, Davio.
go ahead.
Thanks. I'm not comfortable with something that says associated facilities. I don't have a clue what that means. I mean, that could open up a lot of different avenues that I can't agree with at this time. I have no idea what associated facilities are, even though I know you can explain them to me. It still doesn't give me the answer I'm looking for.
How about something that would mean associated with residential developments? You're talking about parks and open space.
Parks and
Maybe
playgrounds.
being more specific with that language that would include parks and open space, paths.
If it said
parks and open
associated residential scale facilities such as parks and playfields?
Could be a civic center or
That's
something
better.
like that. Or another.
Getting closer.
Not to put words in your mouth.
Yeah.
So what is the suggestion? Is there a suggestion for language?
Yeah, I'd be comfortable with making Nathan's suggestion,
Okay.
Nathan's idea.
You have a, he's typing quickly or mousing quickly.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment. I know there's a lot of reservation about this parcel, and I can relate and agree with a lot of those reservations. I think it's important to remember that this language is saying consider. So we're not saying it's being rezoned commercial or rezoned to rezoned to residential today. So it's just considering. So I wanted to make sure that that was mentioned again.
Is there a way to insert in there something that'll make us feel even slightly more comfortable in something to the effect that if and when this parcel is no longer is sold or whatever, then we can consider? In other words, I'm kind of trying to hedge this a little bit and put it so that for now, it's the feel-good way it is, but at the same time, I think we all recognize that we need to potentially consider adapting to not only what will be another housing element, but also to try and incorporate at that time sort of that message. I mean, that's how I interpret consider. If it's consider rezoning right at this moment, then I'm not in favor of it. But if it's consider at the time where it becomes appropriate, then I think that consider has more weight to me.
Then the question comes in is, can the town, we can't go backwards if it sells under its we do nothing and it sells, the new owner can do what he wants in that agriculture, and we can't go back and say, no, you can't do that, we want a park.
Yeah, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if there's a way with words to put in there a feature that allows us to do exactly that consider point, but not make it so blunt as that we're considering rezoning it now, then it's more of a language function for me.
The way that
in
I
terms
read,
of considering in the future, is that you're saying just by saying in the future?
but what's the difference? Consider now or consider in the future? If it's consider in the future, it's still the same fate for the property. If you're saying consider in the future, then you're saying it's going to be okay for somebody else when I'm not here. I don't think that's fair. So either this committee believes that it should be rezoned and that the consideration is sort of a way to make us feel good, that we're not really saying it, but we are. But I think we have to have an opinion about it. My feeling is that consider says we are saying we should look at rezoning, which means we support rezoning. And I think that having parks and dog walks and related facilities, we lose the vineyard, we lose the view, we lose, I think,
We could lose that anyway if we don't do anything.
Well, we won't lose it completely.
Oh, yes, we could.
So
It can't, wait. So, Sandra, it could not become 100% building.
No.
Okay. So let's not exaggerate.
But no, I'm not, I'm just
But
saying
it could become a
a
winery, it could-
large facility.
Right, but still with vineyard, with
Okay.
view corridor protected. And we could lose the entire vineyard to housing and a park. And we would look the same as Pleasanton, California. I mean, part of the experience of Yountville is the vineyard. That's part of why we think it's so beautiful here. It's not just that it's parks. It's that we're surrounded by this spectacular ability to walk through a vineyard and walk next to a vineyard and experience that changing seasons in the vineyard, the brilliant color in the fall. That wouldn't be there if we just say, consider rezoning to open space and parks. It's not going to be a vineyard in there.
Well, there's a vineyard on the other side of abutting the property.
I guess I'm just not willing to think that we could lose 33 acres of one of the most beautiful parts of this town, and that makes this town very special to residents and tourists. It's a spectacular property that is really our crown jewel. We talk about the entrance to our town being on the California side. That might be the automobile entrance, but the emotional entrance is on that north side. How many people stand on Yountville Road and just look out over that? Look at the mustard growing, look at the changing seasons in that vineyard, and it's so walkable and approachable to all of us that live here. And if we say consider, we're saying it's okay to lose that vineyard.
I concur. Well said.
So there's a motion. I think we have a motion on the table, don't we?
We have some proposed, we've trying to wordsmith this on the fly here, but the idea is to, in order to address the objection about the associated facilities, is to spell it out and say open space and parks. And then we wanted to kind of clarify that this is subject to policy 12.2, just as we've talked about already. Just to kind of clarify that it would only be, we would only consider rezoning it under those conditions that are in policy 12.2, which would include satisfying the town's obligations to provide housing under the state housing law, and that it would generate substantial overriding public benefits, and be in compliance with other goals and policies of the general plan, especially those related to corridors and open space. And also that another condition would be that it would need to benefit the public health, safety, and welfare of the community. So I think that kind of satisfies what we're hearing, and at least we hope it does. Maybe kind of modifies it a little bit to make it more amenable to the committee.
But you are correct, there was a motion and second on the floor with the previous
Okay.
language.
So we have another change adding subject to policy 12.2. I've forgotten who made the motion and who seconded it.
I
We
made
have a
it.
motion and Joel seconded. Do you support the language change to your motion?
Yes.
And you support the language change. And we've had conversations that I think really just comes down to the point of we're talking about considering and whether that's a consideration that we believe the council, for many reasons, should have should take into all the issues like addressed in 12.2 in the future. So. With a motion and a second, with no other discussion, seeing no other discussion, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand.
Eric.
Excuse me?
Oh, I was just saying we should raise our hand for these
Okay.
ones. I didn't have anything to
All
say.
those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Okay, thank you.
4 against. It was a 4-5 vote.
4-5 vote. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to the next item, which is market-driven versus use caps.
Right. Okay. So this is another thing that we discussed at the workshop, and there was this question here. What we're really getting at is kind of a philosophy of how are we going to regulate commercial uses in order to kind of regulate any uses that the town deems to be overrepresented. So, for example, the town has a retail diversity ordinance, and it requires that non-wine retail for tasting rooms and other uses that are deemed to be overly represented. So that's one way of regulating regulating uses in town. So this is the question that we asked at the workshop. Which of the following policies related to permits for new businesses would you support? Pick all that apply. And so most people supported setting caps or other limits on new tasting rooms. And then we also had kind of at the second highest was to set caps or other limits on new hotels. And then, but we also, had a pretty strong showing for allowing the market to decide, which is essentially the current approach, except for the retail diversity ordinance. So kind of across we really had a variety of opinions here. So staff had created 2 programs for consideration, and the one is the market-driven, is to allow the market to prescribe the success or failure of a particular type of business rather than setting development caps or other regulatory limits that express an official preference for one type of use over another. So this was discussed by the commercial subcommittee, and they're recommending the market-driven approach. They believe that really would lead to the most vibrant economy. Although, as you saw in the previous slide, the community really did voice its preference for setting use caps or using or some other limits on tasting rooms in particular. So here we've struck out the use caps because it really is kind of an either-or proposition. But that's really what we wanted the committee to discuss.
Thank you. Are there any comments from the subcommittees that discussed this first?
Yeah, it was sort of at the end of our meeting. We were talking. Pardon?
We had consensus.
We had consensus that market-driven. We talked about pretty much just because now it's tasting rooms, in 5 years it could be bookstores, in another 5 years it could be something else. And if we don't allow Yountville commercial ventures to go sort of with the flow, that we wouldn't have a successful commercial district. And at the same time, the market would say there's enough tasting rooms or enough libraries or enough bookstores or whatever it is based on the demand from the community. And if the community of tourists and locals supports the number of whatever it is through voting with their wallet, then that's how it should proceed, and that would provide for a very vibrant commercial district. But if we put use caps and we would have to constantly be thinking about, well, what's the next business, what's the next trend, what's the next thing that's happening, and really we might end up with a very empty commercial district rather than one that is driven by consumer and by the market.
We did discuss, though, as much as we were in favor of the market-driven approach, there's still a place for use caps. For instance, we currently have a cap on tasting rooms.
No.
No.
We have no caps. We're market-driven now.
We give bonuses for non-wine retail. Is that what it was?
There are zones that don't permit them without a conditional use permit where a public hearing would be needing, but right now there is no use cap on any particular use.
I apologize.
Oh, it's confusing.
I was torn on this one because I'm really not a big fan of caps. Right. I think that's kind of silly, and it's never going to be able to predict what you really need to get. On the other hand, I read an article back in the summer, and I shared this with, I don't know if Sandra or Nathan, one of you, about the town of San Carlos. I used to live there. It's this nice little small community on the middle of the peninsula, kind of sandwiched down between Palo Alto and San Mateo. And they were growing. They had growing pains. And they had, when I lived there, this wonderful little main street that had these nice little shops on it and really good retail diversity. And as they grew, the president of the Chamber of Commerce, don't be offended with me, the president of the Chamber of Commerce drove the process. And they tore down one building after another and one parking lot after another to put up high-rise condos because they decided that there was more commercial money to be made by building high-rise condos than any other particular business. And the town looks terrible now. I was down there about 2 months ago. it doesn't look like the place I used to live in. So if you go strictly market-driven, you don't have necessarily a better result. I'm really torn on this one.
But you're talking about visual, what about the finances? Is it doing well that way? Did those high-rise condos prove to be what
That
they
depends
tended?
on whether you're one of the small business owners who had their business torn down or pushed out for the new buildings or not.
But whoever, well, okay.
I guess I'm torn on this one as too, because I don't know if there's ever anything such as a free market. We live in a regulated economy, and I know what I generally hear from what we hear from residents is their concern that when you have just a market-driven choice, then the highest and best use comes forward, and I sense in the community a concern about whether it's too many wine tasting shops or in rooms that those uses can overwhelm a community. So we've never been to a point where we need use caps. At some point in the past, we had a restaurant seat cap for a short while, years and years ago. So I'm torn. I think at some point there's some advantage for the council to be able to have some. They should have some ability to look at the marketplace and try to do their best in what way it is possible to create more resident-serving uses. But it's very difficult to do that, and I've been there. I know what that's like. So,
aren't we kind of in that element anyway, given the physical aspects of our town, the economy that's driven, Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's isn't going to come to this town because it's market driven. It's not going to make a business. Right. A business that is not going to survive in this economy isn't going to come, and so we're kind of market driven in a situation of Yountville is kind of a cap in itself, because there's only so much that can happen here.
I think that's a challenge, because I don't think there's any way you can expect that we'll have a pharmacy or something like that because of the population density and things like that. The question is, at some point, is one type of retail, does it overwhelm the rest of the community? And so you don't necessarily, I don't know if there's a way to create retail, residential serving retail, but maybe there's some value for limits. But it's a challenge whenever government gets involved in trying to do that. So
I agree with you on that. I think it's a very tricky thing to try to regulate that. To have the regulatory limits. It's, because so much is market driven, and the market sort of is an animal of its own. And it kind of goes in its own direction and typically will correct itself as well. For example, having too many tasting rooms, at some point we're just going to have an overabundance of tasting rooms and people are going to move to something else. It might be a dispensary, it could be any number of other things that will happen, but we already see people thinking in that direction.
is there, excuse me?
Just public comment.
Okay. I think we'll come back to the group discussion in a moment, but let me go ahead and open up the public hearing for this item. Is there anyone in the public that has a comment? Oh, there. Please give your name and address again. That'd be great. Thank you.
Mike Zagorczyk, 1953 Yountville Cross Road. Maybe because I'm feeling more courageous having broken the ice than coming up here, but I figured I would just share a thought for consideration. What I appreciate about this process of curation, where effectively you're zoning for certain types of establishments within the town between residential, agricultural, and commercial. And even within the zoning, what I saw was the idea of preserving the town, so putting buildings in place that were limited in size and limited in character. So what I saw was effectively creating the conditions for the town to retain the economic and the personality of the town, and ultimately creating the conditions for the market to thrive a certain way. I'm not a farmer, but I'll use a farming analogy that if you create a garden, things are just going to grow a certain way, but the way you create the garden will probably increase or decrease the likelihood of certain things happening. So my interpretation of the process of zoning and preserving the character was really about putting the boundaries in place to then let the market do what it needs to do within the limits that we set, that the town can handle, versus taking it one step further and actually zoning the businesses themselves. So that was just an observation that I had on this discussion that I wanted to share.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sandra, do we have a retail diversity ordinance, or and how does that come into play with this discussion?
So the retail diversity ordinance is intended to apply to any uses the council deems as overly represented. At this point, it applies to wine tasting rooms, and it requires that wine tasting rooms have 25% of their retail merchandise be non-wine related. What we were seeing was that tasting rooms were coming in and they wanted to sell bottle openers and wine glasses. And by doing this, we were able to see businesses like Heston that sells pots, and it's sort of an interesting retail combination. Others that sell home furnishings, others that sell books. And so that's why we see a little bit more diversity in our retail businesses, or the retail wine tasting businesses.
So the retail diversity ordinance has a potential to be modified and tweaked in the future without, as an option for the council, I guess.
Yes.
In terms of raising percentages or bringing in other uses into that ordinance.
And
it's a good.
Also, the question of whether a cap would be the answer was presented to the council at that time, and they went with something a little softer, which was the retail diversity that gave these tasting rooms an option rather than prohibiting them outright.
We have a safety valve with the retail diversity ordinance that seems to be working now.
Yep.
Is there a consensus in the committee, I guess, to accept the language as proposed?
I'd like to propose a change to language. Add at the end, subject to the retail diversity ordinance. Or something in consideration, in compliance with the retail diversity. Something that works that in clearly with this, so that we have a tool for the future generations to see. There is a tool to help control it if the market gets out of control.
That would require that the retail diversity ordinance be the preferred option always moving forward, and it doesn't give much option to change that if we find that isn't working. But of course, that is an option.
And
that's the current solution to the issue.
Yeah, and also retail diversity applies to retail businesses, whereas this market-driven applies to all commercial activity.
All uses.
So, like, you can't apply the retail diversity to hotels.
Makes sense.
Yep.
I withdraw the motion.
My sense is that there's consensus to support this language. Hearing no other comments, then good. So I guess we're telling the council that we support this language.
Okay,
so
good.
Thank you. No vote necessary.
All right, then let's move on to the next one. So the next issue is about short-term rentals and vacation rentals of property. The town currently does not permit vacation rentals of 30 days or less. And so we asked this question at the last workshop of the community. Finding out what the preference was. And the majority of people said that they supported maintaining that policy. We had a small amount of people who were supportive of changing it to allow a limited number of vacation rentals. There are other towns that do this, that have a set number of vacation rentals that they give out. And then that can change. Those permits can rotate over time or turn over time. And we had very little support to change it to allow unlimited vacation rentals. So we have two policies. The local identity subcommittee recommends the first one, the vacation rentals, and this one is in it is consistent with what what the community had said at the workshop. So this is to maintain policies that prohibit short-term vacation rentals in residential zoning districts and restrict transient uses to the commercial zoning districts. There was another policy that had been recommended by the Local Identity Subcommittee on long-term rentals, but staff did confer with the town attorney, and this is not it's not a viable one. And I think Sandra has some more information about that she could share with you.
The problem with the long-term rental ordinance is that it would apply to all owners owning property that they rent without having to seek an entitlement from the town, so there is no trigger in applying this type of condition, and it runs afoul of state landlord-tenant law that allows 30-day, month-to-month rentals and provides the landlord an option to evict within 60 days. You may be aware that our new accessory dwelling unit or granny unit ordinance does require new units that receive an entitlement to have a minimum rental period of 90 days, but that's because there is a trigger and we can't otherwise apply it outright to residences in town.
On this language where it says maintain policies that prohibit short-term, does that imply the 30 days is the, okay.
Where it says restrict transient uses, definition of transient in these terms is less than 30 days.
Okay.
Is TOT collected on a 30-day rental, or
No.
is that something can
Because
be addressed?
there are none in Yountville, because it's illegal.
They're not transient.
Yeah, so if it's more than 30 days, they aren't considered transient. And so the TOT is a transient occupancy tax, which is what the hotels pay. We also call it the hotel tax. If they're staying for longer than 30 days, they aren't considered transients. And
it's not taxable.
There we go. There's no rental tax at this moment.
I think it would be a good idea if we could to have some discussion about having a permit system and a limited number of vacation rentals. And I believe under that cover, they would be charged TOT tax, which then creates a revenue. So it at least allows us to have it not just happening under the radar screen, let's say, but it allows it to become very transparent and we have more control over it.
I'd like to
think the
address
ones
that.
that are under the radar would still exist?
It's a possibility, but I think that it creates an environment where people become a little bit more like, okay, you can apply for a permit. You do have the capability of doing that. It makes people more accountable.
I have a strong opinion on this. Some of you have already heard it before. I live in a planned unit development where we have a restriction to 90 days. That's the minimum initial rental period. And we can do that because we are a planned unit development. It has really helped allow the sense of a community to exist. And there have been occasions when we had some part-time rentals that were a lot less than 90 days. And that didn't work out very well. Noise was a problem. Lack of consideration for your neighbors was a problem. And recently, I had a discussion with a couple who make their home in Hawaii. And they were talking to me about all the Airbnb problems they have. Now, Airbnb gets a lot of the hits for this because that's the biggest name, okay? But they said it's very, very difficult to maintain the identity of a community when you have these short-term rentals in there because the people in there have nothing to tie them to the community. So I don't like even short-term, any kind of short-term, and I think permit rentals would fall in that category.
Well, they don't necessarily have to. You could put the 30-day limit on them or something like that, but at least there's some control over it. And at least it limits the amount as well.
If you're talking about needing a permit to do a 30-day rental, I think the town already has an ordinance on the books that says if you are a rental property, you have to have a permit.
You have to register.
Right,
to register.
for the $85, that.
So as of January 1st of this year, the rental registration program became effective. And as of today, 11 days after the effective date, there have been 158 applications submitted already and permits processed, which equates to which equates to 261 housing units. Because some of these are duplexes, some of these are quadplexes, and so to give an idea of the scale of rentals, that's about 1/4 of the housing units in town are permitted rentals right now. And we're aware of many others that haven't come and gotten permits yet as well. So that's just something to keep in mind, to wonder just how many rentals are in Yountville.
But if we have a permitting program, like numbers are driving, it still wouldn't make any difference. You still would have people who don't even bother to take out a permit.
Right. You're always going to have people that are under the radar no matter what they do, but it seems like that permitting has gotten a response.
Or they work their way around it by getting a bunch of owners together to form a real estate investment trust, and that way you have 29 people as an owner.
I think it's the only interesting thing about that fact is that, we're finding now that at least 25%, maybe up to 30% or no of this community is rental. And I know we briefly talked about the concept of permitting vacation rentals, but I think with 25% plus of the community in rental, it'd be real difficult to decide who. You would, again, under a market-driven or economy, people would rush to basically go to vacation rental versus long-term rental. And I think the long-term for the community is that we're doing what we can in zoning or something to preserve long-term rental. So I think it would be difficult with so many. If you'd get into a battle of how you would decide who would have the ticket, the golden ticket for vacation rental. It probably would be difficult to manage.
It's very heartening. When we had our discussion in the committee, the subcommittee, we didn't have that number yet. We didn't really know how this was going to shake out, and it's very heartening to see that that many people have come forward.
It's important also to remember that it's 1/4 of those numbers don't include any of the mobile housing units.
Right.
So it's 1/4 of our non-mobile home.
Single family detached or
attached or apartment or multi-apartments.
Well, you can't rent within the parks.
We've received applications, permits that do attempt that. So, and we are aware of Airbnb listings in the parks right now.
Right, and which are, against the park regulations.
So considering our discussion here, is there, hearing if there's no, do I hear any opposition to this language?
No.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open up the public hearing. Is there any comment in the public to address this issue of vacation rentals? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. I'm sensing consensus from the group for the council that we support this language. So is that true?
Yep.
Good, thank you.
Okay, then the next one is in regard to the old historic district. And this was the question that was posed at the community workshop. Would you support any of the following improvements in the old historic district? We had most support for undergrounding utilities. The second one was for streetlights in Old Town. The third highest was sidewalk, curb, and gutter, but that was pretty small at 15. And then only 9 respondents said, no, keep it as it is. So we took that feedback and we modified some of the policies. These are policies that are actually in the general plan now. So you can see the strikeout and the language that was added. So the first one is undergrounding of utilities, and what we did here is we just took out that with the exception of the Old Town Historic District, in recognition of the fact that we had a big majority of folks said that they supported undergrounding in Old Town Historic District. So this one now says require the undergrounding of all utilities and new developments and initiate a program for undergrounding for the rest of the town, period. And then the second policy within the Old Town Historic District is including street lights. So this now says, within the Old Town Historic District, maintain street designs that are rural in nature, provided such an approach will not result in local drainage, erosion, or sedimentation problems. Rural in nature means narrow streets with aggregate shoulders, street trees, and street lights, but no concrete gutter or sidewalk. Designs shall incorporate the simple aesthetic of the Old Town Historic District. And I believe that last line was added by the subcommittee that reviewed that particular policy. So I think that was everything that I wanted to point out, and we appreciate your input on these.
So or does any subcommittee members have comments on the language in both these policies?
Can I see the results of the poll? Can you go back?
Sure.
Please.
The only question I have related to this was something in your comments, the staff's comments, in light of ADA requirements. So is there anything in ADA that would be inappropriate if we implement these policies?
That's actually about a 12-hour workshop, Carl. I'm going to say it depends. And the reason I'm saying it that way is it depends on the level of the development. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to answer the question the first way. There is no requirement, for example, to have a sidewalk. But when you start putting certain levels of development, then it's going to trigger certain things. And that's why I just have to be cautious that I can't make a statement. What I can say is that conditioning it with that, we have defended the Old Town definition where we can because there is no improvement. And that's part of that. So I would say there's a caveat there. Because one of the triggers under California laws, there's triggers on what's considered development, and then and once you do that, then it does need to be. I would want to do some research before I make a definitive statement that a street light necessarily triggers development. But I want to just put out there that, one, we're not in complete control of the definitions, and sometimes people don't like the definitions that the state and the federal government have determined. So I think you're generally okay. The only other caveat, and I'd have Sandra and Nathan look at, Old Town has also, all of those folks, development and building permits, they've been exempt from the collection of the utility undergrounding fee. So they haven't been contributing to the pot that has been used in the rest of the town, and also our current design standards require new development to go underground. So I'm just saying there's a cost factor there that some of those folks may assume that the town's going to do that for them, and I'm just saying they haven't contributed to that, and those of you that have bought in other neighborhoods have paid for that. So I don't know how that asterisk gets put on your policy, but it would be a concern of the future manager over there, Dennington, when he looks at how he's going to pay for all those things.
I'd like to add the reason why the residents of the Old Town Historic District hadn't paid into the undergrounding of utilities is because of the policy that before you has that little amendment in it, because it's prior to now, potentially now, the idea was that part of the aesthetic of the Old Town Historic District are overhead utilities. But
so now they'll have to pay in.
Although that language wasn't specific, that is not an actual part of the existing policy. That was proposed to clarify what has been a practice over the years.
Okay.
And I will share too that when we receive applications for redevelopment of parcels where they're doing a significant amount of work, they're conditioned to underground their overhead lines so that the property is in a position should the district go to undergrounding. So you'll see that there are fewer overhead drops for the newly renovated properties.
So people have, they've remodeled significantly, had to run underground to an existing pole on the street. And we're talking about something more significant, assuming there's dollars available to underground the poles. So, and I think as Steve said, I don't know, there's a lot of communities in the state, and I'm sure all over this country, that have rural communities that don't have sidewalks and things like that. It's a certain character for Yountville and Old Town to have this kind of district, and so
I have a question.
I think go ahead.
Sorry. With regard to the street lights, just because it's underlined there, and are we talking about adding more lights than what already exist, or adding a different type of light, or are we talking about street lights that are Old Town in aesthetic style?
First thing I would have to answer is this is all conceptual, because right now the only streetlights that exist are on generally corners and mid-blocks attached to electrical poles. So I want you to kind of visualize, if the electrical pole goes away, then we have no existing lights. So I would say, to be honest, PJ, it would have to be designed, and since that's not, that could be very different. The town has adopted a new standard that goes in with all new development, which is the black kind of old and a little contemporary together. So we're currently, for example, replacing those as we go into the residential neighborhoods on a phased basis, with the exception of those streetlights that are completely owned by PG&E. So there are a couple neighborhoods. So I'd say that would be, when and if when and if there was an underground utility district, that would probably be part of the discussion then as to what type of light, or an assumption. There'd have to be engineering studies about where to put them. And then you also have issues of, where are they located in the right of way, and things like that. But it would be very different than because if you kind of walk through there, you'll note most of them are what I would call the Cobra lights. They are not the traditional ones, or even the old aggregate poles that you see in some of the residential neighborhoods.
I just put up on a screen a view of one of these lights that are there right now. So you can understand context.
Yeah, I think I was on that subcommittee, and I think that, at least my recollection, which is always not so good, but I think we put this in there as a safety issue. I think we had a lot of concerns, not just in Old Town, but everywhere, that there were some significant safety issues regarding lights. We each had our little corridor of doom that we talked about, and there were several that were really bad. I mean, for one, the way I go home here is through Hopper Creek and then Heather, and there's a section of where the lights end, and I mean, I have to use this because I literally can't see at all. And so we started talking about that, and that's how this got inserted. It's almost town-wide, and whether it's addressed, like Steve says, at some point when it becomes underground or not, I think why this ended up in here is because I think we recognize a real problem with just general lighting throughout town. And so we wanted to acknowledge that, and this seemed like a good place, am I right, Lynn, to insert that. So that's why we did it.
I certainly am a proponent for safety and everything, but with respect to your comment, and I see where you're coming from, but I have also seen the opposite, where some of the new, the bright LED lighting that has gone in is, it doesn't cast that same pleasant hue that seems appropriate in an old town historic atmosphere. And so I would love to see the town think about the aesthetics when they talk about lighting.
Well, I think I agree with that. I think that's well said. But I think when you're talking about an area that has no sidewalks, that's already predominantly pretty dark, I think that safety has to be a driving issue. I don't see how there is any way around that. Now, whether, again, like Steve said, kind of repeating myself, if it comes up later as part of the undergrounding, I think the LED thing that you bring up has merit, but I still think safety trumps that, which is a terrible word to use. But I do think that has to be sort of the guiding light here because it is really relevant to everyone's safety, especially when there's no course like a sidewalk would do and with cars, etc. I mean, that's why I think we put it in there.
Yeah. The second policy as it's written right now may actually satisfy both of your objectives that you're stating with the new definition of rural and nature to include streetlights, but also that second underlined addition that says the designs should incorporate the aesthetic of the Old Town Historic District. And so bright LED every 3 feet wouldn't be that same aesthetic of the Old Town District, but whatever lights are put in would respect the aesthetic of the neighborhood in a safe manner.
I would disagree with everybody putting a blanket statement over LED because from the buildings industry, there's many different shades of LED. Yeah. There didn't used to be. There are now. So we can't say that an LED light casts this blue sharp light always because that's an untruth. We can, and any different style you see can be LED, and any different lumens, any different shade can be LED. So I think we need to be careful that we don't cast dispersion on one thing.
Cast a bad light on it?
Yeah.
Steve, do you have a comment?
I do, because I think I'm going to make a general statement here, but this is one of the challenges when you talk about trying to maintain a rural design standard and the elements and attributes that go with that inside an urban developed environment. Because when you think about a rural design standard, you're talking about those types of things that you might typically see in the unincorporated county. And you don't see lighted walkways, you don't see lighted streetwalks, you see. So what we're starting to see, and frankly, it's a more common conversation, is we want an aesthetic, but we also want these safety things or these lightings that are actually in conflict when you go look at what the design or when you say a rural standard. And we're seeing this more and more because one of the more common questions we often get is, and a new buyer buys in Old Town and they're talking to us and go, when is the sidewalk scheduled? Right. And part of that is just the contradiction and the expectation because, as Davio has pointed out, we have pathways. Most of the pathways are not lit, and it's not a priority because also people can use a flashlight and there's a certain responsibility. So that's where that contradiction of an urban environment with some of those things, because we just have a love-hate relationship with some of those in this town. The same way, marked crosswalks. Oh no, but I'm just saying, we wrestle with some of those, and it's a healthy wrestling match because that's part of the character that people really care about. But I'm just saying, at times we say one thing, and then over here we want this, and I just want to acknowledge that because that's really, I think, a pretty good thing that you guys are kind of noodling on because you recognize that some of these things, they're not quite as simple. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you. I'm going to, 1 second here. I just want to go ahead and to move this forward a little bit more. I want to open up the public comment. Is there any comment from the public on this item, on these two objectives or policies? Seeing that, I'll close the public comment. Is there any comments, or do I sense from the committee that there's consensus on the language on both these policies or objectives to move forward?
I wanted to recognize that while undergrounding utilities and adding streetlights respects the pole, that's what people wanted to see. If we're talking about safety, I think sidewalks should be included. And along that note, you're either rural in nature and you don't have streetlights and sidewalks, or you're urban and you have street lights and sidewalks. And kind of along the lines of what Steve said, you can create street lights that still give a rural feel. I think you could probably do the same with the sidewalk, and that creates a safer environment for everyone. And for me, when I think about sidewalks, I think not about just people who are walking, but also people in wheelchairs, people who are pushing strollers, etc. So I'd like to see the addition of sidewalks.
Is that in opposition to this language that you suggest to make a motion or not?
I might be alone on this one.
Okay, I'm not. Do you have a motion?
I just have one clarification. In the wording, it's saying that, are we saying we want to do these things? Or they're just a possibility that we need to be looking at doing these things? Because it's street lights in Old Town, as Steve said, and what we're doing is what's the next step that we're going to be required to do if we start updating Old Town? Is it going to bring up a whole new set of standards from the state?
Sounds funny to say updating Old Town.
The second proposed policy there, by including streetlights, would provide the justification to include it in a future CIP project if the town wanted to move forward with that. Right now, there is no policy for streetlights in Old Town, and there's no money for it. Steve said it doesn't mean we're moving ahead because we just might. It provides an opportunity.
The way that I was interpreting this, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if and when the undergrounding of utilities is accomplished in Old Town, then there would be a need to replace the current lights that exist with some other type of lighting. Not necessarily that we would add a whole bunch more, but obviously there has to be some amount of lighting. Is that a fair interpretation?
That's the timing is the most logical moving forward. But no, this would open an opportunity to consider more streetlights for safety in the Old Town District, because there hasn't been a policy before now for streetlights, and those are the few that are there.
And
So
Steve, you were saying that if we do we're not necessarily triggering state or federal, but there's the possibility.
There's the possibility, and I'm just going to, because we're having fun with it, I'll try to enlighten you on something. One concern would be, one of the things that as a municipality, when we do an improvement, and a concern I have is that more lights would actually probably be necessary, and I can't say that from an engineering design standpoint, but we now have design standards for streetlight, and they have standards, and if we build something that is substandard, we have exposure liability towards, you didn't put enough lights in, and that's why when you have rural design standards, there's things that you can say, this was built consistent to that, and if we go put something in differently, we would have to have the net product, and there's engineering design work, and I don't want to create the impression that we're talking hundreds more streetlights, but because of where they're located, height, it could change the number, because the standard that we would be reviewed against from an engineering design is, did we adequately light the environment, because we've now changed to the design standard, and the expectation would be that the passageway is lit, the intersections. I'm just saying there's standards that we would have to design to when and if it came into that, and because we're talking currently about Cobra headlights that are much higher and cast a larger my general non-engineering layman's term is going to tell you we're going to need probably 10 to 15% more.
I guess I'd feel better about it if I had a prototype of something, to see what it might look like.
So right now we're coming back though to the conversation of just some general general guidelines for future rewriting of the zoning and design ordinance. I'm not sure we have to necessarily discuss that specifically, and so I'm curious if I'm sensing from the committee are people comfortable with the language on these two policies and objectives?
Yeah, keep in mind that, as you point out, there are subsequent regulations that will come forward in the lower levels of the government. This is the highest wording you can get.
I guess it just is, do we want to say that we're adding streetlights to Old Town? I mean, that's a change.
Yep.
Right? That's the change.
That's the change.
I think it'll be subject to cost and consideration. I mean, right now.
But it means that there would be studies, there would be effort behind it, there would be like, okay, we want to put streetlights in, now what do we do to get streetlights in, right? Mm-hmm. It's sort of a marching order.
A consideration, as Davio said, for maybe safety first, and that as a consideration as part of the CIP or our project improvements that we do in the community over many years. So,
I don't know if we need to do it.
I don't sense any hearing any opposition to this language.
Yeah, there is.
There is?
Yeah.
Okay.
The streetlights, I mean, do we really want to say that we want a program to install streetlights in Old Town? Because it will change the nature of Old Town. It'll make it new Old Town.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. I guess I live in Old Town, and one of the concerns that I have is that for years and years and years, a street light on the top of an electric pole didn't work, and so it's very dark on that. So, I mean, this is Jefferson Street where a lot of people walk. So, I mean, at some point, it seems like the town has to take a consideration of safety and future lawsuits that they'll have to consider where they put streetlights up. But generally, I don't think fairly confident the town won't spend money that they don't need to spend on lights that and so I think at some point streetlights will have to be in Old Town. It's just a question of where they're at and how they're positioned, and I'm not sure that tells us that we're going to necessarily install more streetlights that are not already on the top of electric poles by this general language. So that's why I'm comfortable with it.
I heard something different from Steve. I think what Steve said was if there's a program to install streetlights, then it's a program and it has to follow regulations, and there will be more streetlights, minimally 10 to 15% more, but it could be more because it will then trigger streetlight rules or whatever they are.
So to test the waters, I'm going to move to adopt the language as stated.
For both items?
Yes.
I second that.
There's a motion and a second to adopt these two policies as presented. Is there more comment?
Perhaps we should do one at a time.
Okay, that works.
Well, that might give us a better...
Okay.
Let's do the undergrounding of utilities first. I move to adopt the language as written for undergrounding of utilities.
I still second.
We second that change in the motion. Is there any comment or questions? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Is there another motion?
Did that unanimously pass? Okay, so I now move to accept the language for rural street design as presented.
I second.
A motion and a second. Any other discussion? Since I've heard some comments from people, let's go ahead and raise our hands on this vote so that staff can record it correctly. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Yes, you have to. You made
the motion.
You made the motion, but you can vote
To
again.
move things along.
Okay.
You have, you have.
You can?
Shatter it.
Oh.
Can you? Well, can he retract?
Okay.
Can.
Yeah.
Is Susan voting for it?
You want to,
It may not
I've
matter.
had my hand up for a long time.
So it passes anyway, whether or not you wanted to abstain or not.
let's amend,
You're for
if the motion, are you willing to accept Whitney being, would you willing to accept to be
I'll
the,
adopt to be the person that
You'll-
makes the motion.
So-
That's fine.
do you accept the change? That,
I need to say who voted.
Raise your hands high.
okay. First, let's go back to quickly the author of the amendment and the second. So if there is an issue about someone voting against it, is there
I'll make the motion to adopt the language as is for rural street
for
design.
rural street design is,
And I'll still second it.
second it. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. We got it? All those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Okay,
Just trying to move
Okay.
things along. Sorry.
thank you.
Okay, we're getting down to the
Okay,
end.
can you put both of those items on the, or are they, oh, they're on separate?
They're on
sheets.
separate sheets.
Okay.
Right. But I can just, because,
That's fine.
okay, so
No,
this is this was a new policy that was recommended by the commercial subcommittee, and it's in regard to Yountville Elementary School, and it says, if Yountville Elementary School ceases to exist in the future, only consider rezoning to a residential district.
Okay.
That's it.
Is there a comment from the commercial subcommittee? Any comments?
What does the only mean? Rather than just saying consider rezoning to a residential district.
I think that, I mean, I think maybe the commercial subcommittee can comment on that, but it would say to me that that the intent is that it would only be the residential district, that it would preclude other zoning.
Seems to make it more forceful.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what we talked about.
Well, yeah, it is. Well, it was a way to have
You were
a.
there.
Would we
Perhaps swapping consider and only,
Yeah.
so saying consider rezoning to only the residential district
is
might
that the-
clarify better
We
what
didn't
you're
write it,
going
so
off of.
whatever.
Yeah.
What if we just said if it ceases to exist, rezone to a residential district?
We're fine with that. We were in
Yep,
great
that's good.
consensus
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
Okay,
So get rid
moving
of
in the
only or
future.
consider.
Yeah,
Say
it's a
rezone
very
to a
logical
residential
use
I have a
for
question.
that property.
Steve, do you want to go first?
No, I do want to clarify a little things about public surplus property and public facility use, because I think I may encourage you to reconsider the use of only. But
That was going to be my question.
my encouragement would be that you have, one option typically is that, for example, the town could purchase the property for parkland or redevelopment for community services and buildings. And if you have that language in there, we actually can't, because that would be inconsistent with the general plan. So my thought might be, and maybe Christine and we could have other public facility use, such as town recreational park facility or something like that. I just want to say that, because typically when the schools would, if they were to surplus the property, we would have one of the first opportunities to acquire it. So I'm offering that information to you for your consideration.
Could we include then language that would say a residential district and
Is that what you can read?
park facilities or
Public
something?
facilities, something like that.
I have one question, and that's with it being under the auspices of the school district, does the school district have initial yay or nay as to what happens with that school if it ceases to be a public school? Can they then move into a different type of school or a different type of educational facility or uses for the district, the school district? Do they have those controls initially before it does something else?
Yes.
Because right now it is zoned public facility and it is owned by the school district.
Right.
So as long as the school district is doing something within the realms of a public facility.
I think all we were trying to accomplish was to just put in the thoughts that if the school ceased to exist and the property was available to the town and whatever, that we would like to see housing there, that we think it's a good place for it.
So would this, as just removing the word only, does that? If it ceases to exist, let's consider rezoning it to being houses.
Fine.
Great. Is that okay with Steve?
Otherwise, it stays PF.
Okay.
But isn't this the same discussion we had on the north property?
Right, about
sounds like
consider,
it.
about the word
Exact
consider.
discussion.
Only is only.
Okay. I'm going to open up the public hearing on this item. Is there any comments from the public on this particular discussion? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing.
Just another comment. We don't have to put this in.
That's the other thing, is I was going to say it's sad that it's here, actually, to
Okay.
consider
We didn't
so
expect
the
it to
question is
happen.
whether the committee
be
believes
there.
that we should consider it and suggest it to the council or not, or just remove it. It's up.
It's sort of
I propose we remove it.
I think that's okay.
Because, I thought what you were really saying in this, in the essence, not using the negative, is that it should not be commercial development.
Yes,
Is
exactly.
really what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether we want to say that or whether we want to leave it flexible like the way we've changed it. Is there a consensus to remove it or to...
I think we should keep it, just because I think, we want to be open to, what may happen in the future. So I think it's good to have some thought going into it.
So I was the one who actually threw that out there, and I've been involved in years past with a lot of the tumult that has occurred within the school, and I think we're all, in this room at least, in agreement that we want there to be a school. So if for some reason putting this in there sends the message that we think there won't be a school, by all means, let's take it out. The reason I threw it out there was I wanted to do quite the opposite, was to encourage the school to continue being there, and if the school was to not be there, then the school district couldn't sell it and make it a commercial property or something like that. I think the idea was to encourage us to keep the school at all costs, and I think we're all on board with that. Whether or not we put the language in there or not, I don't know. We're a general plan group. We're tasked with thinking about the what-ifs, and that was a what-if that crossed my mind. I certainly hope that that never happens.
I would echo that sentiment, but I would offer this. Keeping the designation public facilities is actually going to be the most helpful, because when you increase the zoning, because first of all, that means it has a limited nature of use. When you actually zone it and say you would look at housing, you potentially increase the value of the property, which could have the inverse of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And I'm just saying, I think the spirit, and we've really also know, this is, again, part of our whole housing conversation challenge that we've had. We also have a goal of trying to have a population sufficient to keep our elementary school open, but yet we have a hard time putting housing. So I'm just saying, but right now, the public use facility zoning is probably the hardest, because if it's that way, they have to come ask the town to change it, and we don't have to agree. So I'm just saying, good discussion.
But keep it out.
So I hear either a choice to either remove this completely or to consider changing it to consider rezoning or to just to public facility. It's actually already public facility right now. So, or have it retain its zoning as public facility.
Can I ask one more question, and I apologize for extending this on.
Sorry,
Steve. If the school district chooses to sell, does the town have first priority?
There's actually a structure, and we're high on the ranking. I don't want to say that we're first, but we're in the very top threshold. If you were to look at a policy, you might look at using the phrase retain it as a public use facility zoning, because that's going to force, because again, that would mean a school use, a public agency, for us acquiring it for park or additional. So it gives them least commercial or least revenue potential.
I mean, that language basically gives guidance to the school district without giving an incentive to some developer to say, oh, wow, we could do residential development here. So retaining public facility is the safest community-minded zoning, probably. Is there?
We should just take it out.
I think drop it.
Yeah.
Okay. That's I agree. That sounds interesting. That's what we're really saying. So I hear from the consensus of the group is to drop this policy.
Okay, thank you.
Good? Thank you.
Okay, and then the last one is probably not going to be controversial, but this came, we had a discussion about trying to get some more affordable, town-oriented options here for dining. And so the idea was to do a year-round use at the ball field. This question was addressed at the at the workshop to better utilize the Little League concession stand as a year-round business appropriate for the space with no additional parking requirement. And I was split right across the board, really. Absolutely sure, I guess, and I'm hesitant, and just a few people who said no. So we took that and drew up a new policy which says Little League concession stand encourage year-round commercial use of the concession stand.
I always change it to consider.
Consider encouraging year-round commercial use.
Thank you.
I think it sounds, in and of itself, it sounds kind of like a fun endeavor.
Absolutely.
And so I like the thought of it, but I guess without maybe some additional language that would talk about the scale, the size, the scale, maybe it's something that people would hesitate to support.
It's basically a stationary truck stop.
Yep. Food truck, yeah. Stationary food truck.
The
physical
aspects of it
limitations.
are locked in.
Right, you can't, it's
But,
pretty
would
limited.
it be 7 days a week? Would it be,
Well,
that,
I think that happens.
Let me tell you, the next fun thing that the town would like to do is have a conversation with the school district about this. That would be years of conversations, probably.
Well,
So I don't have any fear that this would definitely be considered for years and years. So
take it out.
I don't have a problem with the language because I think it would be
Could be great.
a long time coming and a lot of conversation with the community. I don't know what other people feel, but
I agree with you. It's
just not going to happen next week.
no. Is there a general consensus to support it or remove it?
Support.
Support?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Boyd Snack Shack will.
I'm sure the Little League will
be
love
roasting
it.
the
It can only, and I've been in there, trying to even cook pancakes in there is dangerous to your head because it's a very tight facility. So,
Boyd's gonna
so
do
good.
sugarless snack
Thank
shack.
you. So our consideration. Did I open a public hearing on that?
Oh.
Did I?
On
I'm going to open up
on
the
that
public
last
hearing
one,
on this last item. Is there any comments for the committee? Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing. So let's move back to it's 9:04. So right now, I'm sorry?
Before we move on, to see if there are other policies that.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. I'm going to move here. So we have in 17-1505, we've gone through these programs tonight. There's also the complete other 30 pages of matrix. Are there any particular issues that the committee would like to consider or bring back or consider?
I would like to bring back this whole item to another meeting.
The rest of the matrix?
Yeah, I think it's,
It's late.
Yeah, it's late. It's.
Okay,
thought
so-
this was.
Well, keep in mind, all of the ones we discussed already are on this matrix.
Right.
This is if there are ones that we did not address this evening that are on this matrix. The reasons we staff called out these ones was following the conversations with the ad hoc committees. We received directions that these are the ones worth discussing. If we felt that there are individual members that felt that there were other policies worth discussing, now's the time to bring up those individual policies.
Let's talk about generally where we're at in the next couple meetings, because, I mean, we have a matrix here, we're going to be moving to other subjects. I mean, there's also at a point where we have to come back and kind of look at the big picture, and maybe maybe in some of our discussions the next 2 months will draw us back to some questions. Where are we headed in the next couple months, and generally, or the next meeting? What's the agenda for the next meeting?
So the next meeting, we wanted to discuss the circulation element, and we've already passed out that matrix. We might have a couple of changes to that, so we'll probably be sending out a revised matrix. The other thing we wanted to review was the housing element at the next meeting. However, since we have decided not to make any changes to the North Agricultural Parcel, there really aren't any policies or programs in the housing element that staff would recommend changing. The housing element has already gone through, it was most recently updated in 2015. It's gone through a very lengthy community process. It's also been approved by the State Department of Housing and Community Development, found to be in compliance with state law, and will have to be revised and updated, as we were talking earlier, in 2022 for adoption in early 2023. If we made any changes to that, it actually triggers a new HCD, State Housing and Community Development, or HCD review, and so it's nothing that we would really recommend doing. And so our recommendation would be to not touch the housing element, but we could have a discussion about it. And we would, in that case, encourage the committee members, rather than, we didn't want to prepare a matrix, but we would ask the committee to read the housing element, so you could be prepared to discuss it at the next meeting. We were hoping to get through both of those things where we would be at February. The February meeting. Then the March meeting, we would talk about kind of the remaining elements. So some of them we would actually be reviewing here. So we were talking about history, tourism, and economic development, community character, and arts. That's right, and arts. So we have probably 20, I think, policies that we've developed. Some of them are actually in the land use element. We would just be pulling them out, like history, historical resources. We'd be pulling those out into a separate element, so we could actually, I think that would be a short meeting. And then after that, we would perhaps take a break for a month while we kind of started drafting the element. But at one point, we would bring all of the policies and programs back to the committee for one last review before we went and brought it to the commissions and to the council for review and to the community in a workshop, which is scheduled for April. So we have a lot to get through, actually.
Okay, so we have a vision statement to discuss, and we have a circulation and housing conversation at the next meeting that we're not necessarily making a lot of changes to. Probably our next order of business is to discuss the vision statement. And then the question is, in terms of what Davio said, I mean, we've been through the housing element, the land use element, but we have a point in the future to come back to bring some of the discussion to return to it. If
we do. Yes, we will have a point to bring it back. But I think if there were any specific policies and programs that the TAG members would like to discuss, even if we weren't to do that tonight, if you could let us know, and then we will just bring those back for the next meeting. I think that might help to kind of streamline the review of it.
Is that acceptable? That if any member has a question about a particular land use policy, And then please email staff, and then
Let me suggest the staff give us a deadline to have that information in so it can be on the agenda.
By the end of next Friday. So the 19th
our next
of
meeting.
January.
When is our next meeting? What's the date?
Our next meeting will be February 8th.
So it'll be honest before we know it. Okay, so in terms of the vision statement, does I sense that we're ready to come to a conclusion tonight, and we'll just put the vision statement as the first item on the agenda for the next meeting? Is that what the board feels we should do?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so,
I have a request.
okay.
I just have a short request. When you're sending these out, could you date them? Like when they're drafted? Because I don't know about anybody else, but I've got piles.
Yeah, I
And
know.
now I'm trying to like match things to, I'd make notes on certain things, and it's helpful to have a date. Please? Thanks. Okay.
So Whitney and I are both absent next for the February meeting. Is everybody else here so that we're covering?
So
We will still be able to hold the meeting as long as 5 people are here.
And
It's to make a quorum.
PJ and Lynn will be here then to be able to vote, and both of them to be able to vote in their place then, or
If there's at least 2
there's a
people
need
missing.
for a
then
vote,
both.
or okay. All right. So I think we have a set, an agenda for next meeting. Let's move on to then item 7. Is there any other commissioner, committee comments, or
Was there some
Group?
discussion that one of these meetings would take place at the Veterans Home? Or was that a workshop?
It's going to be, it's actually scheduled for next week. That's the time to give that little report. So exactly 1 week from today, on January 18th in the morning, we're going to give pretty much the same presentation that was the land use workshop in a more condensed form up to the Allied Council at the Veterans Home that talks about these land use issues to get their input and everything. And of course, the results of that will be shared with the TAG as well, as we just look at all of the different, I guess, visiting workshops that we'd be doing.
That's next
But that
week.
would not be a formal meeting of the town advisory group. It would be a workshop we're taking. And of course, you're invited to attend that, and we'll send the email of the official time of that out. It's just
please
right
send
away.
out, I know it'll be reported, other
Yeah, but it
other
is Thursday morning.
forums, but next week on Thursday?
You don't have the time and location.
I'll email all those details out to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Eric, could you tell them you're visiting council on Tuesday, what you guys are doing?
Oh, thank you. Staff has asked Boyd and I to just report next Tuesday at the council meeting at where we're at, just a short report. I mean, staff will have a report. We'll take, I guess, their questions, and just to give them a quick update of where we are at in the process. So is there anything that the committee members would like us to share with the council?
Say consider. Make sure
Make
sure you say consider several times.
The buzzword.
We considered many issues in the last few months. Okay, thank you.
And the full committee is invited to that meeting to show support for
It's
the
a council meeting, next
Yes.
Tuesday's council meeting that starts at 6 o'clock?
6, yes.
Okay.
And I believe this is early on in the agenda.
Say, put us early on.
Yeah, it's a staff.
Sharon says it.
Okay. All right. Good, thank you. So, hearing that there's no other commission comments, is there a motion to adjourn to our next meeting, which is February 8th, 2018, at 6 p.m. in this forum here? There's a motion from Joel and a second from Davio. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you it was a good meeting, good discussion.